great, because I paid a match for it. So, interesting. Oh, the match is still going on. Cool. Okay. We're on chapter 2. If you're late, you're stupid. It's Animal Farm. 3 nights later, the Major died peacefully in his sleep. His body was buried at the foot of the orchard. This was early in March. During the next 3 months, there was much secret activity. The Major's speech has given to the more intelligent animals on the farm a completely new outlook on life. They did not know when the rebellion was predicted by Major would take place. They had no reason for thinking that would be within their own lifetime, but they saw clearly it was their duty to prepare for it. The work of teaching and organizing the others fell naturally upon the pigs, who were generally recognized as being the cleverest of the animals. Preeminent among the pigs, the 2 boars named Snowball and Napoleon, whom Jones was breeding up for sale. Napoleon was a large, rather fierce-looking Berkshire boar, the other Berkshire on the farm, not much of a talker, but with a reputation of getting his own way. Snowball was a more vivacious pig than Napoleon, quicker in speech and more inventive, but was not considered the same depth of character. All the other male pigs on the farm were porkers. The best known among them is a small fat pig named Squealer, with round cheeks, twinkling eyes, nimble movements, and a shrill voice. He was a brilliant talker, and when he was arguing some difficult point, he always had a way of skipping around side to side and whisking his tail, which was somehow very persuasive. The others said of Squealer that he could turn black into white. These 3 were elaborated old Major's teachings into a complete system of thought, to which they gave the name of animalism. Several nights a week, after Mr. Jones was asleep, they held secret meetings in the barn and expounded the principles of animalism to the others. At the beginning, they met with such stupidity and apathy. Some of the animals were talked of the duty of loyalty to Mr. Jones, whom they referred to as Master, or made elementary remarks such as, "Mr. Jones beat us. If he was gone, we were starved to death." Others asked such a question, "Why should we care what happens after we are dead?" Or, "If the rebellion is to happen anyway, what difference does it make whether we work for it or not?" And the pigs had great difficulty in making them see the contrary of the spirit of animalism. The stupidest question of all was asked by Molly, the white mare. The very first question she asked Snowball was, "Will there be sugar after the rebellion?" "No," said Snowball firmly. "We have no means of making sugar on the farm. Besides, you do not need sugar. You will have all the oats and hay you want." "And shall I be allowed to wear my ribbons in my mane?" asked Molly. "Comrade," said Snowball, "those ribbons that you are so devoted to are the badge of slavery. Can you not understand that liberty is worth more than ribbons?" Molly agreed, but she did not sound very convinced. The pigs had an even harder struggle to counteract their lies put on by Moses, the tame raven. Moses was Mr. Jones's especial animal, was a spy and a tale-bearer, and he was a clever talker. He claimed to know the existence of a mysterious country called Sugar Candy Mountain, to which all animals went when they died. It was situated somewhere up in the sky, a little distance beyond the clouds, Moses said. In Sugar Candy Mountain, it was Sunday 7 days a week. Clover was in all seasons, all year round, and lump sugar and linseed cake grew on the hedges. The animals hated Moses because he always told tales and did not work, but some had believed in Sugar Candy Mountain, and the pigs had to argue very hard to persuade them that there was no such place. Their most faithful disciples were the 2 cart horses, Boxer and Clover. Those 2 had great difficulty in accepting it. Oh shit, sorry, I skipped a line. my bed. Kurt Cobain fell a little bit. He's gonna fall and crack later on in the night. I just know it. Okay. Their faithful disciples were the two cart horses, Boxer and Clover. These two had great difficulty in thinking anything out for themselves, but having once accepted the pigs as their teachers, they absorbed everything that they were told and passed it on to the other animals by simple arguments. They were unfailing in their attendance of the secret meetings in the barn, and led the singing of Beasts of England, which within the meetings always ended. Now, as it turned out, the rebellion had achieved much earlier and much easily than anyone had expected. In past years, Mr. Jones, although a hard master, had been a capable farmer. Of late, he had fallen on evil days. He had become much disheartened after losing money in a lawsuit, and had taken to drinking more than that was good for him. For whole days at a time, he would lounge in his wind-sore chair in the kitchen, reading the newspaper, drinking, and occasionally feeding Moses on crusts of bread soaked in beer. His men were idle and dishonest. The fields were full of weeds, the buildings wanted roofing, the hedges were neglected, and the animals were underfed. June came, and the hay was already ready for cutting. On Midsummer's Eve, which was a Saturday, Mr. Jones went to Willingdon's and got so drunk at the Red Lion that he did not come back till midday on Sunday. The men had milked the cows in the early morning, and then had gone out rabbiting, without bothering to feed the animals. When Mr. Jones got back, he immediately went to sleep on the drawing-room sofa with the news of the world across his face, so that when the evening came, the animals were still unfed. At last they could not stand it no longer. One of the cows broke in the doors of the store shed with her horn, and all the animals began to help themselves from the bins. It was just then Mr. Jones woke up. The moment he and his 4 men were in the store shed, with whips in their hands, lashing out in all directions. This was more than the hungry animals could bear. With one accord, through nothing of the kind that planned before, they flung themselves upon their tormentors. Jones and the men suddenly found themselves being butted and kicked from all sides. The situation was quite out of their control. They had never seen animals behave like this before, and the sudden uprising of creatures whom they were used to thrashing and maltreating just as they chose, frightened them almost out of their wits. After only a moment or two, they gave up defending themselves and took off to their heels. A minute later, all 5 of them were in full flight down the cart track that led to the main road, with the animals pursuing them in triumph. Mrs. Jones looked out the bedroom window, saw what was happening, hurriedly flung a few possessions into a carpet bag, and slipped out of the farm from another way. Moses sprang off his perch and flapped after her, croaking loudly. Meanwhile, the animals had chased Jones' men out of the road and slammed the 5-barred gate behind them. And so, almost before they knew what was happening, the rebellion was successfully carried through. Jones was expelled, and the manor farm was theirs. For the first few minutes, the animals could barely believe their good fortune. Their first act was to gallop. I know someone just gave me a big donation probably, but I'm trying not to break character. I'll thank you later. Thanks. Their first act was to gallop in a body right round the boundaries of the farm, as though to keep quite sure that no human being was hiding anywhere upon it. Then they raced back to the farm building to wipe out the last traces of Jones' hated reins. The harness room at the end of the stables was broken open. The bits, the nose rings, the dog chains, the cruel knives with which Mr. Jones has been used to castrate pigs and lambs were all flung down from the well. The reins, the halters, the blinkers, the degrading nose bags were thrown in the rubbish fire, which were burning in the yard. So were the whips. All animals capered with joy as they saw the whips going up in flames. Snowball also threw in the fire the ribbon in which the horses' manes and tails were usually been decorated on market days. Ribbons, he said, should be considered as clothes, which are the mark of human beings. All animals should go naked. When Boxer heard this, he fetched the small stray hat which he wore in summer to keep the flies out of his ears, and flung it on the fire with the rest. In a little while, the animals destroyed everything that reminded them of Mr. Jones. Napoleon then led them back to the store shed and served out a double ration of corn to everybody, with 2 biscuits for each dog. Then they sang Beasts of England from end to end 7 times running, and after that they settled down for the night and slept as though they had never slept before. But they woke us up at dawn, as usual, and suddenly remembering the glorious thing that happened, they all raced down into the pasture together. A little way down the pasture there was a knoll that commanded a view of almost all the farm. The animals rushed to the top of it and gazed around in the clear morning light. Yes, it was theirs. Everything that they could see was theirs. In the ecstasy of that, they galloped around and round. They hurled themselves into the air in great leaps of excitement. They rolled in the dew. They cropped mouthfuls of sweet summer grass. They kicked up clods of the black earth and snuffed its rich scent. Then they made a tour of inspection of the whole farm and surveyed with speechless admiration of plowland, the hayfields, the orchard, the pool, the spinney. It was as though they had never seen these things before, and now they could hardly believe that this was all theirs own. They then filed back into the farm building and halted in silence outside the door of the farmhouse. This was theirs too, but they were too frightened to go inside. After a moment, however, Snowball and Napoleon wide the door open with their shoulders, and the animals entered in a single file, walking with the utmost care of fear and disturbing anything. They tiptoed from room to room, too afraid to speak above a whisper, gazing with a kind of awe at the unbelievable luxury, at the beds of their feathered mattresses, the looking-glasses, the horsehair sofa, the Brussels carpet, the lithograph of Queen Victoria over the drawing-room mantelpiece. They had just come down from the stairs and Molly was discovered missing. Going back, the others found that she had remained behind in the best bedroom. She had taken a piece of blue ribbon at Mrs. Jones' dressing table and was holding it against her shoulder and admiring herself in a glass in a very foolish manner. The others reproached her sharply, and they went outside. Some hams hanging in the kitchen were taken for burial, and the burial beer in the scullery was stove in with a kick from Boxer's hoof. However, nothing in the house was touched. An unanimous resolution had passed on the spot, and the farmhouse was preserved as a museum. All were agreed that no animal must ever live there. The animals had their breakfast, and Snowball and Napoleon called themselves together. "Comrades," said Snowball, "it is 6:30, and we have a long day before us. Today we begin the hay harvest. But there is another matter that must be attended at first." The pigs now revealed that in the past 3 months they had taught themselves to read and write from an old spelling book that belonged to Mr. Jones's children, which had thrown on the rubbish heap. Napoleon sent on pots of black and white paint and led the way down to the 5-barred gate that gave the old main road. Then Snowball, for it was Snowball who had the best writing, took a brush before the 2 knuckles of his trotter, painted out Manor Farm on the top of the bar of the gate, and in its place painted Animal Farm. This was the name of the farm from now onwards. After this, they went back to the farm building, where Snowball and Napoleon went on a ladder, which they had caused to be set against the end of the big barn. They explained that by their studies of the past 3 months, the pigs have succeeded in reducing the principles of animalism to Cobain fell. He didn't break. Ale Farm, this was the name of the farm from now onwards. After this, they went back on the farm building where Snowball and Napoleon sent for a ladder, which they had caused to be set against the end wall of the big barn. They explained that by their studies of the past 3 months, the pigs succeeded in reducing the principles of animalism to 7 commandments. These 7 commandments would now be inscribed on the wall. They would form an unalterable law. They would form an unalterable law by which all the animals on Animal Farm must live forever after. With some difficulty, for it is not easy for a pig to balance himself on a ladder, Snowball climbed up and set to work, with Squealer a few rungs behind him, holding the paint pot. The commandments were written on the tiered wall in great white letters that would read 30 yards away. They ran thus: The 7 commandments. Number 1. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Number 2. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Number 3. No animal shall wear clothes. Number 4. No animal shall sleep in a bed. Number 5. No animal shall drink alcohol. Number 6. No animal shall kill any other animal. Number 7. All animals are equal. It was very neatly written, except for friend, which was spelled friend, and some of the S's was the wrong way around. The spelling was correct all the way through, though. Snowball read it aloud for the benefit of the others. All the animals nodded in complete agreement, and the cleverer ones at once began to learn the commandments by heart. Now, comrades, cried Snowball, throwing down the paintbrush, to the hayfield. Let us make it a point of honor to get in the harvest more quickly than Jones, his men can do. But at this moment 3 cows, who seemed uneasy for some past time, set up loud lowing. They had not been milked for 24 hours, and their udders had been bursting. After a little thought, the pigs sent for buckets and milked the cows fairly successfully. Their trotters were well adapted to this task. Soon there were 5 buckets of frothing, creamy milk, at which the animals looked for considerable interest. What is going to happen to all that milk? Said someone. Jones used to mix some of it in our mash, said one of the hens. Never mind the milk, comrades, cried Napoleon, placing himself in the front of the buckets. That will be attended to. The harvest is more important. Comrade Snowball will lead the way. I shall follow in a few minutes. Forward, comrades. The hay is waiting. So the animals trooped down to the hayfield to begin the harvest, from which they came back in the evening and noticed that the milk had disappeared. Chapter 3. Oops. That's chapter 1. Chapter 3. How they toiled and sweated to get their hay in. But their efforts were rewarded, for the harvest was as even bigger success as they had hoped. Sometimes the work was hard. The implements had been designed for human beings and not for animals. It was a great backdraw that no animal was able to use any tool that involved standing on his hind legs. But the pigs were so clever that they could think of a way around every difficulty. As for the horses, they knew every inch of the field, and in fact understood the busyness of mowing and raking far better than Jones and his men ever done. The pigs did not actually work, but directed and supervised the others. With their superior knowledge, it was natural that they should assume the leadership. Boxer and Wilbur would harness themselves to the cutter and the horse rake. No bits or reins were needed for these days, of course, and tramped steadily round and round the field, with a pig walking behind and calling out, "Gee up, comrade," or "Whoa back, comrade," as the case might be. And every animal, down to the humblest, working at turning the hay and gathering it. Even the ducks and hens toiled to and fro all day in the sun, carrying 2 wisps of hay in their beaks. In the end, they finished their harvest in 2 days, less time than was usually taken Jones and the men. Moreover, it was the biggest harvest the farm had ever seen. There was no wastage whatsoever. The hens and ducks, with their sharp eyes, had gathered the best up to the very last stalk. Not an animal on the farm had stolen so much as a mouthful. All through the summer, the work of the farm went like clockwork. The animals were happy as they had never conceived it possible to be. Every mouthful of food was acute positive pleasure, and now is truly their own food, produced by themselves and for themselves, not doled to give them by a grudging master. With the worthless, parasitical human beings gone, there was more for everyone to eat. There was more leisure, too. Inexperienced though the animals were, they met with many difficulties. For instance, later in the year, they harvested corn. They had tried to tread it out with the ancient style and blow it up the chaff with their breath. Instead, the farm possessed no threshing machine, but the pigs, with their cleverness, and Boxer, with his tremendous muscles, always pulled through. Boxer was the admiration of everyone. He had been a hard worker, like in Jones's time, but now he seemed more like 3 horses than 1. There were days when the entire work of the field farm seemed to rest on his mighty shoulders. From morning to night he was pushing and pulling, always on the spot where the work was hardest. He made arrangements with the other cockerels to call him in the morning, half an hour earlier than anyone else, and would put in some volunteer labor at whatever seemed to be needed most. Almost the Thanks for the follow, dude. You're the only person I will mention. Thanks for the follow. He had made arrangements with one of the cockerels to call him in the mornings, half an hour earlier than anyone else, and put in some volunteer labor at whatever seemed to be most needed before the regular day's work begun. His answer to every problem, every setback was, "I will work harder," which he had opted as his personal motto. But everyone worked according to their capacity. The hens and ducks, for instance, saved 5 bushels of corn at the harvest by gathering up the stray grains. Nobody stole, nobody grumbled over his rations. The quarreling and biting and jealousy which were the normal features of life in the old days had now disappeared. Nobody shirked, or almost nobody. Molly, it was true, was not good at getting up in the morning, and had a way of leaving work early on the ground there was a stone in her hoof, and the behavior of the cat was somewhat peculiar. It was soon discovered that the work that had to be done by the cat could never be found. She would vanish for hours on end and then reappear at meal times or in the evenings after work was over, as though nothing had happened. But she always made such excellent excuses and purred so effectively that it was not impossible not to believe in her good intentions. Old Benjamin the donkey seemed quite unchanged since the rebellion. We're talking about eating animals. We're going to eat animals. Old Benjamin the donkey seemed quite unchanged since the rebellion. He did his work in the same slow, obstinate way he had done it in Jones's time, never shirking and never volunteering for extra work either. About the rebellion and its results, he would express no opinion. When asked whether he was not happier now that Jones was gone, he would say, "Only donkeys live a long time. None of you have ever seen a dead donkey." And the others had to be content with that cryptic answer. On Sundays there was no work. Breakfast was an hour later than usual, and after breakfast there was a ceremony which was observed every week without fail. First came the hoisting of the flag. Snowball found in the harness room the green tablecloth that Mrs. Jones had painted it, a hoof and a horn in white. This was run up by a flagpole in a small house, starting every Sunday morning. The flag was green, Snowball claimed, to represent the green fields of England, while the hoofs and horns symbolized the future of the Republic of the animals which would arise from the human race, finally overthrown. Trying so hard not to break character. After the hoisting of the flag, all the animals took into a big glass for the final assembly, which was known as the meeting. Here, the work of the coming week was planned out, and resolutions were put forward and debated. It was always the pigs who put forth the resolutions. The other animals understood how to vote, but could never think of any resolutions of their own. Snowball and Napoleon were by far the most active in debates. But it was noticed that these two were never in agreement. Whatever suggestion either of them made, the other would be counted on to oppose it. Even when it was resolved, a thing no one could object to in itself, to set aside a small paddock before the orchard as a home of rest for animals who were past work, there was a stormy debate over the correct retiring age for each class of animal. The meeting always ended with a singing of beasts of England, and the afternoon was given up to recreation. On Sundays, there was no work. Oh shit, I already read that. Oh yeah, here we go. The pigs had set aside the harness room as a headquarters for themselves. Here in the evenings, they would study blacksmithing, carpenting, and other necessary arts from books which they had brought out of the farmhouse. Snowball also busied himself with organizing the other animals into what was called the animal committees. He was he was defatigable at this. He formed the egg production committee for the hens, the Clean Tails League for the cows, the Wild Comrades Re-Education Committee. The object was to tame the rats and rabbits. The Whiter Wool Movement for the sheep and other various, besides institutioning classes in reading and writing. On the whole, these projects were a failure. The attempts to tame the wild creatures, for instance, broke down almost immediately. They continued to have very much as before, and were treated with generosity. Simplicity took advantage of it. The cat joined the re-education committee and was very active in it for some days. She was seen one day sitting on a roof and talking to some sparrows who were just out of her reach. She was telling them that all animals were now comrades, and that any sparrow who chose would come and perch on her paw, but the sparrows kept their distance. The readings and writing classes, however, were a great success. By the autumn, every animal on the farm was literate in it to some degree. As for the pigs, they could already read and write perfectly. The dogs learned fairly well, but were not interested in reading anything except the 7 Commandments. Muriel the goat could read somewhat better than the dogs, and sometimes used to read to the others in the evening from scraps of newspaper which he found in the rubbish heap. Benjamin could read as well as any pig, but never exercised his faculty. So far he was known, he said there was nothing worth reading. Clover learnt the whole alphabet, but could not put words together. Boxer could not Boxer could not get beyond the letter D. He would trace out A, B, C, D in the dust with his great hoof, and then would stand staring at the letters with his ears back, sometimes shaking his forelock, trying with all his might to remember what came next, and never succeeding. On several occasions, indeed, he did learn E, F, G, H, but by the time he knew them, it was always discovered that he forgot A, B, C, and D. Finally, he decided to be content with the first 4 letters, used to write them out once or twice every day to refresh his memory. Molly refused to learn any, but the 6 letters which spelt her own name, Mollie. She would form them very neatly on a piece of twig and would decorate them with flowers or 2, and walked around them admiring them. That was weird. That wasn't a me reading error. That's literally how it said. Decorate them with a flower or 2 and walk around them admiring them. It's just a lot of thems. None of the other animals on the farm could get further than the letter A. It was also found that the stupider animals, such as the sheep, hens, and ducks, were unable to learn the 7 Commandments by heart. After much thought, Snowball declared the 7 Commandments could in effect be reduced to a single maxim, namely, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. This, he said, contained the essential principle of animalism. Whoever had thoroughly grasped it would be safe from human influences. The birds at first objected, since it seemed to them that they also had 2 legs. But Snowball proved to them that this was not so. A bird's wing, comrade, he said, is an organ of propulsion and not of manipulation. It should in form be regarded as a leg. The distinguishing mark of the man is the hand, the instrument of which he does all his mischief. Birds did not understand Snowball's long words, but they accepted his explanation, and all the humbler animals set to work to learn the next maxim by heart. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad was inscribed at the end of the barn wall above the 7 commandments and in bigger letters. When they had once got it by heart, the sheep developed a great liking for this maxim, and often as they lay in their field, they would start bleating, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and keep it up for hours on end, never growing tired of it. Napoleon took no interest in Snowball's communities. He said that the education of the young were more important than anything that could have been done for those who had already grown up. It happened that Jessie and Bluebell had already whelped soon, and the hay harvest giving birth between them 9 sturdy puppies. As soon as they were weaned, Napoleon took them away from their mothers, saying he would make himself responsible for their education. "Don't eat that, you whore! Go away!" "You two, what? Get out!" The mystery of the... He took up into a loft which could only be reached by a ladder from the harness room, and there kept them in such seclusion from the rest of the farm, soon forgot their existence. The mystery of where the milk went was soon cleared up. It was mixed every day into the pig's mash. The early apples were now ripening, and the grass of the orchard was layered with windfalls. The animals had all assumed as a matter of course that there would be shared out equally. One day, however, the order went forth that all the windfalls would be collected and brought to the harness room for the use of the pigs. At this, some of the other animals murmured that it was of no use. All the pigs were in full agreement at this point, even Snowball and Napoleon. Squealer was sent to make the necessary explanation to the others. "Comrades," he cried, "you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in a spirit of selfishness and privilege. Many of us actually dislike milk and apples. I dislike them myself. Our sole object in taking these things is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, this has been proved by science, comrades, contains substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of this farm depends on us. Day and night we are watching over your welfare. It is for your sake that we drink that milk and eat those apples. Do you know what would happen if we pigs failed in our duties? Jones would come back. Yes, Jones would come back. Surely, comrades," cried Squealer, almost pleading, skipping from side to side and whisking his tail. "Surely there is no one among you who wants to see Jones come back." Now, if there was one thing that the animals were completely certain of, it was that they did not want Jones back. When it was put to them in the light, they had no more to say. The importance of keeping the pigs in good health was all too obvious. So it was agreed, without further argument, that the milk and the windfall apples, and also the main crop of apples, when they ripened, would be served for the pigs alone. Chapter 4. There's 10 chapters, if you're wondering, so not a long book. By the late summer, the news of what happened on Animal Farm had spread across half the country. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons whose instructions were to mingle with the animals on neighboring farms, tell them the story of the rebellion, and teach them the tune of Beasts of England. Most of the time, Mr. Jones had been sitting in the tap room of the Red Lion at Wimbledon, complaining to anyone who would listen of the monstrous injustice he had suffered in being turned out of his own property by a pack of good-for-nothing animals. The other farmers sympathized in principle, but did not give him much help. At heart, each of them was secretly wondering whether he would not somehow turn Jones's misfortune to his own advantage. It was lucky that the owners of the two farms had joined Animal Farm, were now permanently bad. It was lucky that the owners of the two farms which adjoined Animal Farm were on permanently bad terms. One of them, which was named Foxwood, was a large, neglected, old-fashioned farm with more overgrown by woodland, with all its pastures worn out and its hedges in disgraceful conditions. Its owner, Mr. Pinkleton, was an easy-going gentleman farmer who spent most of his time fishing or hunting according to the season. The other farm, which was called Pinchfield, was smaller and better kept. Its owner was a Mr. Frederick, a tough, shrewd man, perpetually involved in lawsuits and with a name of deriving hard bargains. These two disliked each other as much as it was difficult for them to come up with an agreement, even in defense of their own interests. Nevertheless, they both were thoroughly afraid of the rebellion on Animal Farm, and were anxious to prevent their own animals from learning too much about it. At first they pretended to laugh, to scorn the idea of animals managing a farm themselves. The whole thing would be over in a fortnight, they said. But they put it about the animals on the Manor Farm. They insisted on calling it Manor Farm. They would not tolerate the name Animal Farm. They were perpetually fighting amongst themselves and were rapidly starving to death. When time passed, the animals have evidently not starved to death. Frederick and Pilkington changed their tune and began to talk of the terrible wickedness that flourished on Animal Farm. It is given that the animals were now practicing cannibalism, tortured one another with red-hot horseshoes and their females in common. It came to rebelling against the laws of nature, Frederick and Pilkington said. However, these stories were never believed. Rumors of a wonderful farm where the human beings have turned out and the animals managed their own affairs continued to circulate in vague and distorted forms. And throughout the year, a wave of rebelliousness ran through the countryside. Bulls, which had always been tractable, suddenly turned savage. Sheep broke down hedges and devoured the clover. Cows kicked the pail over. Hunters refused their fences and shot their riders on the other side. Above all, the tune and even the words, "Beasts of England," were known everywhere. It was spread with astonishing speed. The human beings could not contain their rage when they heard this song, though they pretended to think it merely ridiculous. They could not understand, they said, how even animals could bring themselves to sing such commendable rubbish. Any animal caught singing it was given a flogging on the spot, and yet the song was irrepressible. The blackbirds whistled it in the hedges, the pigeons cooed it in their elms. It got into the din in the smithies and in the tune of the church bells, and the human beings listened to it. They secretly trembled, hearing it a prophecy of their own doom. Early in October, when the corn was cut and stacked, and some of it at already threshold, a flight of pigeons came whirling round the air and alighted by the yard of Animal Farm in the wildest excitement. Jones and all his men, with half a dozen from Foxwood and Pinchfield, had entered the 5-barred gate and were coming up to the cart track that led to the farm. They were all carrying sticks, except Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun in his hands. Obviously, they were attempting to recapture the farm. It was as long been expected, and all preparations had been made. Snowball, who studied an old book of Julius Caesar's campaigns, which he had found in the farmhouse, was in charge of the defensive operations. He was giving his orders quickly. In a couple of minutes, every animal was at his post. As the human beings approached the farm building, Snowball launched his first attack. All the pigeons, the number of 35, flew to and fro over the men's heads and muted upon them from midair. And while the men were dealing with this, the geese, who had been hiding behind the hedges, rushed out and pecked viciously at the calves of their legs. However, this was only a light skirmishing maneuver, intended to create a little disorder. The men easily drove the geese off with their sticks. Snowball now launched his second field of attack. Muriel, Benjamin, and all the sheep, with Snowball at the head of them, rushed towards and prodded and butted the men from every side, when Benjamin turned around and lashed at them with his small hoof. But once again, the men with their sticks and their hobnailed boots were too strong for them, and suddenly, at a squeal from Snowball, which was a signal for retreat, all the animals turned and fled through the gateway of the yard. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw as they imagined their enemies in flight, and rushed after them in disorder. This was just what Snowball had intended. As soon as they were well inside the yard, the 3 horses, the 3 cows, the rest of the pigs who had been lying in ambush in the cowshed suddenly emerged in the rear, cutting them off. Snowball now gave the signal for the charge. He himself dashed straight for Jones. Jones saw him coming, raised his gun and fired. The pellets scored bloody streaks along Snowball's back, and the sheep dropped dead. Without halting for an instant, Snowball flung his 15 stones against Jones's leg. Jones was hurled into a pile of dung, and his gun flew out of his hand. But the most terrifying spectacle of all was that Boxer, rearing up his hind legs and striking out the great iron-shod hooves like a stallion. His very first blow took a stable lad from his boxwood in the skull and stretched him lifeless in the mud. At the sight, several men dropped their sticks and tried to run. Panic overtook them, and the next moment all the animals together were chasing them round and round the yard. They were gored, kicked, bitten, trampled on. There was not an animal on the farm that did not take vengeance on them after his own fashion. Even the cat suddenly leapt off the roof onto a cowwoman's shoulders and sank her claws into his neck, at which he yelled horribly. At a moment when the opening was clear, the men were glad enough to rush out of the yard and make a bolt for the main road. And so within 5 minutes of their invasion, they were in an ingamorous retreat the same way as they come, with a flock of geese hissing after them and pecking at their calves all the way. All the men were gone except one. Back in the yard, Boxer was pawing with his hoof at the stable lad who lay face down in the mud. Trying to turn him over, the boy did not stir. "He is dead," said Boxer sorrowfully. "I had no intention of doing that. I forgot that I was wearing iron shoes. Who believes that I did not do this on purpose?" "No sentimentality, comrade," cried Snowball, from whose wounds the blood was dripping. "War is war. The only good human being is a dead one." "I had no wish to take life, not even human life," repeated Boxer with his eyes full of tears. "Where is Molly?" explained somebody. Molly was, in fact, missing. For a moment there was a great alarm, as fear the men might have harmed her in some way, or even carried her off with them. In the end, however, she was found hiding in her stall, with her head buried among the hay in the manger. She had taken to flight as soon as the gun went off, and the others came back from looking for her. It was to find the stable lad, who was in fact only stunned, had already recovered and made off. The animals had now reassembled in the wildest excitement, each recounting his exploits in the battle at the top of his voice. An impromptu celebration of victory was held immediately. The flag was run up, and "Beasts of England" was sung a number of times, and the sheep who had been killed was given a solemn funeral. A hawthorn bush was planted on her grave. At graveside, Snowball made a little speech, emphasizing the need of all animals to be ready to die for Animal Farm if need be. The animals decided unanimously to create a military decoration, Animal Hero First Class, which was conferred, and then on Snowball and Boxer. It consisted of a brass medal, their old horse braces which had been formed in the harness room, to be worn on Sundays and holidays. There was also Animal Hero Second Class. which was conferred posthumously on the dead sheep. There was much discussion as to what the battle should be called. In the end, it was called the Battle of the Cowshed, since that was where the ambush had sprung. Mr. Jones's gun had been found lying in the mud, and it was known that there was a supply of cartridges in the farmhouse. It was decided to set up the gun in the foot of the flagstaff with a piece of artillery, and it fired twice a year, once October the 12th, the anniversary of the Battle of the Cowshed, and once on Midsummer Day, the anniversary of the rebellion. Chapter 5. As winter drew on, Molly became more and more troublesome. She was late for work every morning and excused herself by saying that she had overslept. And she complained on mysterious pains, although her appetite was excellent. On every kind of pretext, she would run away from work and go to the drinking pool, where she would stand foolishly gazing at her own reflection in the water. There was also rumors of something more serious. One day, as Molly was strolling blithely in the yard, flirting her long tail and chewing on a hay, Clover took her aside. "Molly," she said, "I have something very serious to say to you. This morning I saw you looking over the hedge that divided Animal Farm from Foxwood. One of Mr. Pinkelton's men was standing on the other side of the hedge, and I was a long way away, but I am almost certain I saw this. He was talking to you, and you were allowing him to stroke your nose. What does that mean, Molly?" "He didn't. I wasn't. It's not true," cried Molly, beginning to prance around and paw the ground. "Molly, look at me in the face. Do you give me your word of honor that man was not stroking your nose?" "It's not true," repeated Molly, but she could not look Clover in the face. And the next moment she took to her heels and galloped away into the field. A thought struck Clover. Without saying anything to the others, she went to Molly's stall and turned over the straw with her hoof. Hid under the straw were a pile of lump sugar and several bunches of ribbon of different color. 3 days later, Molly disappeared. For some weeks, nothing was known of her whereabouts. Then the pigeons reported that they'd seen her on the other side of Willingdon. She was between the shafts of a smart dog cart painted red and black, which was standing outside a public house. A fat, red-faced man in check breeches and gaiters, looked like a publican, was stroking her nose and feeding her with sugar. Her coat was newly clipped, and she wore a scarlet ribbon around her forelock. She appeared to be enjoying herself, so the pigeons said. None of the animals ever mentioned Molly again. In January, they became bitterly hard weather. The earth was like iron, and nothing could be done in the fields. Many meetings were held in the big barn, and the pigs occupied themselves with planning on work of the coming season. It has come to be accepted that the pigs, who are manifestly cleverer than the other animals, should decide all questions of farm policy. Their decisions to be ratified by a majority vote. The arrangements would have worked well enough if it was not for the fact of the disputes between Snowball and Napoleon. These two disagreed at every point where disagreement was possible. If one of them suggested sowing a bigger archeage with barley, the other was certain to demand a bigger archeage of oats. And if one of them said that such a field should write for cabbage, the other would declare that useless for anything except roots. Each had his own following, and there were some violent debates. At the meetings, Snowball would often won over the majority by his brilliant speeches, but Napoleon was better at canvassing support for himself in between times. He was especially successful with the sheep. Of late, the sheep had been taking to bleating 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, both in and out of season, as they often interrupted meetings with this. It was noticed as they were especially liable to break into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad at crucial moments in Snowball's speeches. Snowball had made a close study of some back numbers of the farmer and stock breeder, which he had found in the farmhouse, and was full of plans of innovations and improvements. He talked learnedly about field drains, silage, and backslag, and had worked out a complicated scheme for all the animals to drop their dung directly into the fields at a different spot every day to save the labor of cartage. Napoleon produced no schemes of his own, but said quietly that snowballs would come to nothing, and seemed to be biding at his time. But of all their controversies, none was so bitter as the one that took place over the windmill. In a long pasture not far from the farm building, there was a small knoll which could be the highest point on the farm. After surveying the ground, Snowball declared that this was the best place for a windmill, which could be made operate by a domino and supply the farm with electrical power. This would light the stalls and warm them in winter. It could also run a circular saw, a shaft cutter, a mango slicer, an electric milking machine. The animals would never be heard of anything of this kind before, and the farm was an old-fashioned one, and only the primitive machinery. And they listened in astonishment while Snowball conjured up pictures of fantastic machines that would do their work for them while they grazed at their ease in the fields and improved their minds with reading and conversation. Within a few weeks, Snowball's plans of windmill were fully worked out. The mechanical details came mostly out of 3 books which belonged to Mr. Jones. 1,000 useful things to do about the house, every man in his own bricklayer, and electricity for beginners. Snowball used as his study the shed, which had once again been used for incubators, and a smooth wooden floor, suitable for drawing on. He was closeted there for hours at a time, with his books held open by a stone, and with a piece of chalk gripping between the knuckles of his trotter. He would move rapidly to and fro, drawing in line after line and uttering little whimpers of excitement. Gradually, the plans grew into a complicated mass of cranks and cogwheels, covering more than half the floor, which the other animals found completely unintelligible, but were very impressed. All of them came to look at Snowball's drawings at least once a day. Even the hens and ducks came, and were at pains not to tread on the chalk marks. Only Napoleon held aloof. He had declared himself against the windmill from the start. One day, however, he arrived unexpectedly to examine the plans. He walked heavily around the shed, looked closely at every detail of the plan, and snuffed at once or twice, then stood for a little while contemplating them out of the corner of his eye. Then suddenly he lifted his leg, urinated over the plants, and walked out without uttering a word. The whole farm was deeply divided on the subject of the windmill. Snowball did not deny that to build it would be a difficult business. Stone would have to be carried and built up into walls. Then the sails would have to be made, and after that there would be need for dynamos and cables. How these were supposed to be procured, Snowball did not say, but he maintained that it could be done in a year, and thereafter he declared such labor would be saved that the animals would only need to work 3 days a week. Napoleon, on the other hand, argued that the great need of the moment was to increase food production, and if this was wasted on a windmill, they would all starve to death. The animals formed themselves into 2 factions under the slogans, "Vote for Snowballs in the 3-day week," or "Vote for Napoleon and the full manager." Benjamin was the only animal who did not side with either faction. He refused to believe either that food would become more plentiful or that the windmill would save work. "Windmill or no windmill," he said, "life would go on as it always has gone. That is, badly." Apart from the disputes over the windmill, there were the question of the defense of the farm. It was fully realized that, as though the human beings had defeated in the battle of the cowshed, they might make another and more determined attempt to recapture the farm and reinstate Mr. Jones. They had all the more reason for the doing so because the news of their defeat had spread across the countryside and made the animals of the neighboring farms more restive than ever. As usual, Snowball and Napoleon were in disagreement. According to Napoleon, what the animals must do was to produce firearms and train themselves in the use of them. According to Snowball, they must send out more and more pigeons and stir up rebellion among the animals of the other farms. The one argued that if rebellions happened everywhere, they would have no need to defend themselves. The animals listened first to Napoleon, then to Snowball, and could not make up their mind as to which was right. Indeed, they always found themselves in agreement with one who was speaking at the moment. At last the day came when Snowball's plans were completed. At the meeting of the following Sunday, the question of whether or not to begin the work on the windmill was put to a vote. When the animals had assembled in the big barn, Snowball stood up, and though occasionally interrupted by bleating of the sheep, set forth his reason for advocating the building of this windmill. Then Napoleon stood up to reply. He said very quietly that this windmill was nonsense, and that he advised nobody to vote for it. He promptly sat down again. He had spoken with barely 30 seconds and seemed almost indifferent as to the effect he produced. At this, Snowball sprang to his feet, shouting down the sheep, who had begun bleating again, broke into a passionate appeal in favor of the windmill. Until now, the animals had been about equally divided in their sympathies, but in a moment Snowball's eloquence had carried them away. In glowing sentences he painted a picture of Animal Farm as it might be when sordid labor was lifted from their animals' backs. His imagination had run far beyond shaft cutters and turnip slicers. Electricity, he said, could operate threshing machines, plows, harrows, rollers, and reapers and binders, sometimes supplying each stall with its own electric light, hot or cold water, an electric heater. By the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which way the vote would go. But just at that moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a particular sidelong look at Snowball, uttering a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had ever heard him utter before. At this there was a terrible baying sound outside. The 9 enormous dogs, wearing brass-studded collars, came bounding into the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, who sprang from the place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. In a moment he was out the door, and they were after him. Too amazed and frightened to speak, all the animals crowded through the door to watch the chase. Snowball was racing across the pasture that led to the road. He was running as only a pig can run, but the dogs were chasing at his heels. Suddenly he slipped, and it seemed certain that they had him. Then he was up again, running faster than ever, and the dogs were gaining upon him again. One of them all closed his jaw on Snowball's tail, but Snowball whisked it free just in time, then put on an extra spurt, and just to Fuge's despair, slipped through a hole in the hedge and was seen no more. Silent and terrified, the animals crept back into the barn. In a moment the dogs came bounding back. At first no one had been able to imagine that there were creatures to come from, but the problem was solved. They were the puppies whom Napoleon had taken from their mothers and reared privately. Though not yet fully grown, they were huge dogs, and as fierce-looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. It was noticed that they wagged their tail to him in the same way that other dogs had used to do to Mr. Jones. This is my knee, by the way, not like a boob. The palm of him. So hard. What the fuck is wrong with you guys? How many people are here? 5? What the fuck is wrong with you guys? What are you doing? That's what follow, dude. What the fuck is wrong with you guys? Napoleon with the dogs following him. Now mounted on the raised portion of the floor where Major was previously stood to deliver a speech. He announced from then on now, Sunday morning meetings could come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said, and wasting of time. Wait, my Cheez-Its. I have my tripod. My tripod has trash bags. Napoleon, with the dogs following him, now mounted on in the raised portion of the floor where Major was previously stood to deliver his speech. He announced that from now on, Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said, and wasted time. In future, all questions related to the working of the farm should be settled by a special committee of pigs, presided over by himself. These would meet in private and afterwards communicate their decisions to the others. The animals will still assemble on Sunday mornings to salute the flag. Fag. Salute the flag and sing Beasts of England and receive their orders for the week. But there was no more debates. In spite of the shock that Snowball's expulsion had given them, the animals were dismayed by this announcement. Several of them would have protested if they could not find the right arguments. Even Boxer was vaguely troubled. He said his ears back, stood his forelock several times, and tried hard to marshal his thoughts, but in the end he could not think of anything to say. Some of the pigs themselves, however, were more articulate. 4 young porkers in the front row uttered shrill squeals of disapproval, and all 4 of them sprang to their feet and began speaking at once. But suddenly the dogs sitting around Napoleon let out a deep, menacing growl, and the pigs fell silent, sat down again. The sheep broke out in a tremendous bleat of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, which went on for nearly a quarter of an hour and put an end to any chance of discussion. Afterwards, Squealer was sent from the farm to explain the new arrangements to the others. "Comrades," he said, "I trust that every animal here appreciates the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon has made in taking this extra labor upon himself. Do not imagine, comrades, that leadership is a privilege. On the contrary, it is a deep and heavy responsibility. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to let you make your own decisions for yourselves, but sometimes you might make the wrong decisions. Comrades, and then where should we be? Suppose you have decided to follow Snowball, with his moonshine of windmills. Snowball, we all now know, is no better than a criminal. He fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowsheds, said somebody. Bravery is not enough, said Squealer. Loyalty and obedience are more important. As for the Battle of the Cowshed, I believe the time will come when we shall find that Snowball's part in it was more exaggerated. Discipline, comrades. Iron discipline. That is the watchword for today. One false step and our enemies should be upon us. Surely, comrades. You do not want Jones back. Once again, this argument was unanswerable. Certainly the animals did not want Jones back. If holding a debate on Sunday mornings was liable to bring him back, then the debates must stop. Boxer, who had no trouble in thinking things over, voiced the general feeling of saying, if Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. And from then on, he adopted the maxim, Napoleon is always right, in addition to his private motto of, I will work harder. By the time the weather had broken and the spring plowing had begun, the shed where Snowball had drawn his plans on the windmill had been shut up, and it was assumed that the plans had rubbed off the floor. Every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, the animals assembled into the big barn to receive their orders for the week. The skull of old Major, now clean of flesh, had been disinterred from the orchard and set up as a stump at the foot of the flagstaff beside the gun. After the hoisting of the flag, the animals were required to file past the skull in a reverent manner before entering the barn. Nowadays, they did not sit all together as they had done in the past. Napoleon with Squealer and the other pig named Minimus, who had a great, remarkable gift of composing songs and poems, sat in the front of the raised platform with all 9 young dogs forming a semicircle around them, and the other pigs sitting behind. The rest of the animals sat facing down in the main body of the barn.
Food.
Yeah, I heard him.
Yeah, you're set up.
I'm retrieving my meat. Do you like my story? I'm George Orwell. Do you like my story so far? Oh, the nuggets actually good.
Yeah, I like them.
Okay.
I want you to try them so you might have something to eat while you're here. I got the spicy noodles.
Oh, spicy? Spicy nuggets?
It's fast food spicy.
Okay.
I thought you liked spicy nuggets.
Ew. I'll eat them. Fucking keep having to break fucking character. Should have trained 7 years as an artist for this. I love him. Did anyone notice my haircut? I fucking miss you. You swear in front of me, bro. I'm young. It's okay, yeah. Sorry, it's fine. I swear all the time. I can't hear anything. That's probably what I muted. You look so cool. Thank you. Whoever said that. Keep strong and keep it up for your next appointment. Moments. Hello, everyone. I hope y'all are having a great day. Yeah. Bad connection. What was the eye contact, though? I'm playing a game. No, don't drown. MLBB gamer. I do play MLBB. What happened? Do you play Mobile Legends? I'm George Orwell. Bitch. We continue. I got a Frosty. Kurt Cobain's falling again. I can hear him. Frosty. Watch him go. He's gonna fall. Don't miss it. I'm gonna light another match. I think it's funny to waste all my matches. He knocked my whole background down. Motherfucker. I mean, he's my dad, but like, motherfucker. You alright? You alright? Yeah, he's alright. Kurt Cobain. I must wash myself. He can't read the story because he's dead. But he's gonna hold my book for me while I do certain things. I clean my face of Frosty and deal with my cats. I will continue reading Animal Farm. And we will rebel. Hey, boss. Don't be a fuck ass. You know where fuck asses go. Hey, boss. Come here, fuck ass. Come here. Play another match, shall we? Ignite the world. One false step and our enemies will be upon us. Surely, comrades, you do not want Jones back. Once again, the argument was unanswerable. Certainly, the animals did not want Jones back. If the holding of debates on Sunday morning was liable to bring him back, then the debates must stop. Boxer, who had now had time to think things over, voiced the general feeling of saying, "If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right." And from then on he adopted that maxim. Napoleon is always right. In addition to his private motto of, "I will work harder." Last time the weather had broken, the spring plow had begun. The shed where Snowball had drawn his plans in the windmill had been shut up, and it assumed that the plans had been rubbed off the floor. Every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, the animals assembled in the big barn to receive their orders for the week. The skull of old Major, now clean of flesh, had been disinterred from the orchard and set up on a stump at the foot of the flagstaff, beside the gun. After the hoisting of the flag, the animals were required to file past the skull in a reverent manner before entering the barn. Nowadays, they did not sit all together as they have done in the past. Napoleon with Squealer and the pig named Minimus, who had a remarkable gift for composing songs and poems, sat in the front of the raised platform with the 9 young dogs forming a semicircle around them, and the other pigs sitting behind. The rest of the animals sat facing them in the main body of the barn. Napoleon read out the orders of the week in a gruff, soldierly way, and a single singing of Beasts of England. All the animals dispersed. On the third Sunday after Snowball's expulsion, all animals were somewhat surprised to hear Napoleon announce that the windmill was to be built after all. He did not give any reason for having changed his mind, but merely warned the other animals that the extra task would mean very hard work. It might even be necessary to reduce their rations. The plans, however, had been prepared down to the last detail. A special committee of pigs had been at work upon them for the past 3 weeks. The building of the windmill with various other improvements was expected to take 2 years. That evening, Squealer explained privately to the other animals that Napoleon had never in reality been opposed to the windmill. On the contrary, it was he who advocated it in the beginning, and the plans which Snowball had drawn on the floor of the incubator shed had been stolen from among Napoleon's papers. The windmill was, in fact, Napoleon's first creation. Why then, asked somebody, had he spoken so strongly against it? Here Squeaker looked very sly, and he said, "Was Comrade Napoleon's cunning? He seemed to oppose the windmill simply as a maneuver to get rid of Snowball, who was a dangerous character, and had a bad influence. Now that Snowball was out of the way, the plans could go forward without his interference." "This," said Squealer, was sometimes called tactics. He repeated a number of times. Tactics, comrades. Tactics. Skipping around and whisking his tail with a merry laugh, the animals were not certain what the word meant, but Squealer spoke so persuasively, and the 3 dogs who happened to be with him growled so threateningly that they accepted his explanation without further question. Chapter 6. Again, only 10 chapters. I read this last night, like one sitting, so that's what's going to happen on stream today. It's tougher, or watch a different stream. All that year, the animals worked like slaves, but after they were happy in their work. They grudged no effort or sacrifice, well aware that everything that they did was for the benefit of themselves and those of their kind who would come after them, and not for a pack of idle, thieving human beings. Throughout the spring and summer, they worked a 60-hour week, and in August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoons as well. This work was strictly voluntary, but any animal who absented himself would have made his rations reduced by half. Even so, it is found necessary to leave certain tasks undone. The harvest was little successful in the previous year, and 2 fields should have been sown in roots in the early summer, but were not sown. Because the plowing had not been completed early enough, it is possible to foresee the coming winter would be a hard one. The windmill presented an unexpected difficulty. There was a good quarry of limestone on the farm, and plenty of sand and cement that had been found in the outhouse. Those materials of building were at hand. But the problem the animals could not at first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way in doing that except with picks and crowbars, which no animal could use, because no animal could stand on his hind legs. Only after weeks of vain effort did the right idea occur to somebody, namely to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders, far too big to be used as they were lying all over the bed of the quarry. The animals lashed ropes around these, and all together, cows, horses, sheep, any animal that could lay rope. Even the pigs sometimes joined at critical moments. They dragged them with desperate slowness to the slope at the top of the quarry, where they had toppled over the edge to shatter into pieces below. Transporting a stone, when it was once broken, was comparatively simple. The horses carried it off in cartloads, the sheep dragged single blocks. Even Muriel and Benjamin yoked themselves into the governess cart and did their share. By late summer, a sufficient store of stone was accumulated and the building begun under the interdependence of the pigs. But it was a slow, laborious process. Frequently took a while for exhausting efforts to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry. Sometimes when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer, whose strength seemed equal to that of all the rest of the animals put together. When the boulder began to slip and the animals cried out in despair at finding themselves dragged down the hill, it was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulder to a stop. To see him toiling up into the slope, inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of his hooves clawing at the ground, and his great side matted with sweat, filled everyone with admiration. Clover warned him sometimes to be careful not to overstrain himself, but Boxer would never listen to her. His 2 slogans, "I will work harder," and "Napoleon is always right," seemed an efficient answer to all the problems. He had made arrangements with a cockatiel to call him 3/4 of an hour earlier in the evening, instead of half an hour. In his spare moments, all of which were not many nowadays, he would go alone to the quarry, collect a load of broken stone, and drag it down to the sites of the windmill unassisted. The animals were not badly off throughout the summer, in spite of the hardness of their work. If they had no more food than they had in John's days, at least they did not have less. an advantage of having to feed themselves and not having to support 5 extravagant human beings all as well was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. In many ways, the animals' method of doing things were more efficient and saved labors. Such jobs as weeding, for instance, would be done with a thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animal now stole, it was unnecessary to fence off pastures with arable land, which saved a lot of labor of the upkeep of hedges and gates. Nevertheless, as the summer wore on, various unforeseen shortages began to make themselves felt. There was need of paraffin oil, nails, string, dog biscuits, and iron for the horses' shoes, none of which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also need to be seeds and artificial manures, besides various tools, and finally the machinery from the windmill. How these were supposed to be procured, no one was able to imagine. One Sunday morning, when the animals assembled to receive their orders, Napoleon announced that he had decided upon a new policy. From now onward, Animal Farm would engage in trade with neighboring farms, not, of course, for commercial purpose, but simply in order to obtain certain materials which were urgently necessary. The needs of the windmill must override anything else, he said. He was therefore making arrangements to sell a stack of hay and part of the year's wheat crop, and later on, if more money was needed, it had to be made up by the sale of eggs, for which there was always a market in Willingdon. The hens, said Napoleon, should welcome this sacrifice as their own special contribution towards the building of the windmill. Once again, the animals conscious of a vague uneasiness, never to have any dealings with human beings, never to engage in trade, never to make any use of money. Had these not been among the earliest resolutions passed on the first triumph meeting after Jones was expelled? All the animals remember passing such resolutions, or at least they thought they remembered it. The 4 young pigs who had protested when Napoleon abolished the meeting raised their voices timidly, but they were promptly silenced by a tremendous growl from the dogs. Then, as usual, the sheep broke into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and the momentary awkwardness was smoothed over. Finally, Napoleon raised his trotter for silence and announced that he had already made the arrangements. There would be no need for any of the animals to come into contact with human beings, which would clearly be most undesirable. He intended to make the whole burden upon his own self. And Mr. Whymper, a solicitor in Willingdon, had agreed to act as intermediary between Animal Farm and the outside world, and would visit the farm every morning to receive his instructions. Napoleon ended his speech with his usual cry of "Long live Animal Farm!" And after singing Beasts of England, the animals were dismissed. Afterwards, Squealer made a round of the farm and set all the animals' minds at rest. He assured them that the resolution against gaining in trade and using money will never have been passed or even suggested. It was pure imagination, probably traceable at the beginning to lies circulated by Snowball. A few animals still felt faintly doubtful, but Squealer asked them shrewdly, "Are you certain, comrade, that there is something that you have dreamed, comrades? Have you any record of such a resolution? Is written down anywhere?" And since it was certainly true that nothing of the kind existed in writing, the animals were satisfied that they had been mistaken. Every morning, Mr. Whymper visited the farm that had been arranged. He was a sly-looking little man with side whiskers and a solicitor in his very small way of business, but sharp enough to realize earlier that anybody else than Animal Farm would need a broker, and that the animal commissions would be worth having. The animals watched him coming and going of a kind of dread, and avoided him as much as possible. Nevertheless, the sight of Napoleon on all fours delivering orders to Whymper, who stood on 2 legs, roused their pride and partly recounseled them to the new arrangement. Their relations with the human race were now not quite the same as they were before. The human beings did not hate Animal Farm any less now that it was prospering. Indeed, they hated it even more than ever. Every human being held it in an article of faith that the farm would go bankrupt sooner or later, and above all, the windmill would be a failure. They would meet in public houses and prove to one another by means of diagrams that the windmill was bound to fall, or that if it did stand up, then it would never work. And yet, against their will, they developed a certain respect for the efficiency of which the animals were managing their own affairs. One symptom of this was that they had begun to call Animal Farm by its proper name, and ceased to pretend that it was called Manor Farm. They also dropped the companionship of Jones, who had given up hope of getting his farm back and gone to live in another part of the country. Except through Wimber, there was not yet contact between Animal Farm and the outside world, but there were constant rumors that Napoleon was about to enter into a definite business agreement with either Mr. Pilkington of Foxwood or Mr. Frederick of Pinchfield, but never it was noticed with both simultaneously. It was about this time that the pigs suddenly moved into the farmhouse and took their residence there. Again, the animals seemed to realize that there was a resolution against this that had been passed in the earlier days, and again, Squealer was able to convince them that this was not the case. It was absolutely necessary, he said, that the pigs, who were the brains of the farm, should have a quiet place to work in. It was also more suited to the dignity of the leader, for of late they had taken the speaking of Napoleon under the title of leader. To live in a house than in a mere sty. Nevertheless, some of the animals took disturbed when they heard that the pig not only took their meals in their kitchen and used the drawing room and a recreation room, but also slept in beds. Boxer passed it off as usual, with Napoleon is always right. Clover, who thought she remembered a definite ruling against beds, went to the end of the barn and tried to puzzle out the 7 commandments that were inscribed there. Finding herself unable to read more than individual letters, she fetched Muriel. Muriel, she said, read me the 4th commandment. Does it not say something about not sleeping in a bed? With some difficulty, Muriel spelled it out. It says, no animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets, she announced finally. Curiously enough, Clover had not remembered that 4th commandment mentioned sheets, as it were on the wall. It must have been done so. And Squealer, who happened to be passing at that moment, attended by 2 or 3 dogs, were able to put the whole matter in its proper perspective. You heard them, comrades, he said. The pigs not sleep in the beds of the farmhouse, and why not? You do not suppose merely that there should ever be a ruling against beds. A bed means a place of sleep. A pile of straw in a stall is a bed, properly regarded. The rule of against sheets, which are a human invention. We have removed the sheets from the farmhouse beds and sleep between blankets. And very comfortable beds they are, too. But not more comfortable than we need, I can tell you. Comrades, with all the brain work we have to do nowadays, you would not rob us of our repose, would you, comrades? You would not have us too tired to carry on our duties? Surely none of you wish to see Mr. Jones back. The animals reassured him that point immediately, and no more was said about the pigs sleeping in the farmhouse beds. Then, some days afterwards, it was announced that from now on the pigs would get up an hour later in the morning than the other animals. No complaint was made about that either. By the autumn, the animals were tired but happy. They had a hard year after a sale of part of the hay and corn, and the stores of food for the winter were none too plentiful, and the windmill compensated for everything. It was almost half built now. After the harvest, there was a stretch of dry, clear weather, and the animals toiled harder than ever, thinking it very worthwhile to plod to and fro all the way with blocks of stone. By doing so, they could raise the walls another foot. Boxer would even come out of the nights and work for an hour or 2 on his own for the light of the harvest moon. And in their spare moments, the animals would walk round and round the half-finished mill, admiring the strength and perpetual clarity of its walls and marveling that they could ever been able to build anything so imposing. Only old Benjamin refused to grow enthusiastic about the windmill, as usual. He would utter nothing beyond the cryptic remarks so the donkeys live a long time. November came, and with raging southwest winds, building had to stop because it was now too wet to mix the cement. Finally, there was a night when the gale was so violent that the farm building rocked on the foundation, and several tiles were blown off the roof of the barn. The hens woke up squawking with terror because they all dreamed simultaneously of hearing a gun go off in the distance. In the morning, the animals came out of their stalls and found the flagstaff had been blown down by an elm tree at the foot of an orchard, been plucked up like a radish. They noticed that when a cry of despair broke from every animal's throat, a terrible sight had met their eyes. The windmill was in ruins. With one accord, they dashed down to the spot. Napoleon, who seldom moved out of a walk, raced ahead of them all. Yes, there lay the fruit of their struggles, leveled to its foundations, the stones they had broken and carried by laboriously scattered all around. Unable at first to speak, they stood gazing mournfully at the litter of fallen stone. Napoleon paced to and fro in silence, occasionally snuffing at the ground. His tail had grown rigid and twitched sharply from side to side, a sign of intense mental activity. Suddenly he halted, as though his mind were made up. "Comrades," he said quietly, "do you know who is responsible for this? Do you know the enemy who has come in the night and overthrown our windmill? Snowball." He suddenly roared in a voice of thunder. "Snowball has done this thing in sheer malignity, thinking to set back our plans and avenge himself for his ignominious expulsion. This traitor has crept here under the cover of night and destroyed our work of nearly a year. Comrades, here and now, I announce the death sentence upon Snowball, animal hero second class, and half a bushel of apples to any animal who brings him to justice, a full bushel to anyone who captures him alive." The animals were shocked beyond measure to learn that even Snowball could be guilty of such an action. There was a cry of indignation, and everyone began thinking out ways of catching Snowball if he should ever come back. Almost immediately, the footprints of the pigs were discovered in the grass a little distance from the knoll. They could only be traced for a few yards, but appeared to lead to a hole in the hedge. Napoleon snuffed deeply into pronounced them to be Snowball's. He gave it his opinion that Snowball had probably come from the direction of Foxwood Farm. "No more delays, comrades," cried Napoleon when the footprints had been examined. "There's work to be done. This very morning we will begin rebuilding the windmill. We will build it all through the winter, rain or shine. We will teach this miserable traitor that he cannot undo our work so easily. Remember, comrades, there must be no alteration in our plan. We shall be carried out on the day. Forward, comrades. Long live the windmill. Long live Animal Farm." Chapter 7. Welcome in. It was a bitter winter. The southern weather was falling by feet of snow, and by a hard frost, which did not break until well into February. The animals carried on the best they could with the rebuilding of the windmill. well knowing that the outside world was watching them as their envious human beings would rejoice and triumph when the mill were not finished on time. Out of spite, the human beings pretended not to believe that a snowball would destroy the windmill. They said it had fallen down because the walls were too thin. The animals knew that this was not the case. Still, it was decided to build the walls 3 feet thick this time instead of 18 inches as before, which meant collecting more quantities of stone. For a long time, the floor was full of snowdrifts and nothing could be done. Some progress was made in a dry, frosty weather that followed, but it was cruel work and the animals could not feel so hopeful about it as they had felt before. They were always cold and usually hungry as well. Only Boxer and Clover never lost heart. Squealer made excellent speeches on the joy of service and the dignity of labor. What was this?
It's an animal.
He's definitely a pig. Did you see that? Would Big Boss be Snowball or Napoleon?
Napoleon.
Napoleon. And, the quarry was full of snow drifts and nothing could be done. Some progress was made in the dry, frosty weather that followed, but it was cruel work and the animals could not feel so hopeful as they felt before. They were always cold and usually hungry as well. Get the fuck out of the way. Go. Only Boxer and Clover never lost heart. Squealer made excellent speeches on the joy of service and the dignity of labor. But the other animals found inspiration in Boxer's strength and his never-failing cry of, "I will work harder." In January, food fell short. The corn ration was drastically reduced, and it was announced that an extra potato ration would be issued to make up for it. Then it was discovered that the greater part of the potato crop had been frosted in clamps, which had not been covered thickly enough. The potatoes had become soft and discolored, and only a few... My eyes are so itchy. That's not part of the gag. I don't know why my eyes are itchy. For days at a time, the animals had nothing to eat but chaff and mangles. Starvation seemed to stare them in the face. It was vitally necessary to conceal this fact from the outside world. Emboldened by the collapse of the windmill, the human beings were inventing fresh lies about Animal Farm. Once again, it was put about that all the animals were dying of famine and disease, and that they were continually fighting amongst themselves, and they resorted to cannibalism and infanticide. Napoleon was well aware of these bad results that might follow if the real fact of the food shortage was known, and he decided to make use of Mr. Whymper to spread a contrary impression. Hitherto, the animals had had little to no contact with Whymper on his weekly visits. Now, however, a few selected animals, mostly sheep, were instructed to remark casually in his hearing their rations have increased. In addition, Napoleon ordered that the almost empty bins in the store shed to be filled nearly to the brim with sand, which then was covered up with what remained of the grain and meal. On other suitable pretexts, Whymper had led through the store shed when allowed to catch a glimpse of the bins. He was deceived and continued to report to the outside world there was no food shortage on Animal Farm. Nevertheless, towards the end of January, it became obvious that it was necessary to procure some more grain from somewhere. In these days, Napoleon rarely appeared in public, but spent All this time in the farmhouse, which was guarded at each door by fierce-looking dogs, when he did emerge, it was a ceremonial manner, with an escort of 6 dogs who closely surrounded him and growled if anyone came near. Frequently he did not appear on Sunday mornings. When the hens heard this, they raised a terrible outcry. They had been warned early that their sacrifice might be necessary, but had not believed that would really happen. They were just getting their clutches ready for the spring sittings and had protested to take the eggs away now was murder. For the first time, the expulsion of Jones, there was something resembling a rebellion. Led by 3 black minicore pelts, the hens made a determined effort to thwart Napoleon's wishes. The method was to fly up to the rafters and lay their eggs, which smashed the peaches on the floor. Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He ordered the hens' rations be stopped and decreed that any animal giving so much a grain of corn to a hen should be punished by death. The dogs saw to it that these orders were carried out. For 5 days the hens held out. Then they cabulated and went back to their nesting boxes. 9 hens died in the meantime. Their bodies were buried in the orchard, and it was given out they had died of coccidiosis. Whymper heard nothing of this affair. The eggs were duly delivered. A grocer's van driving up to the farm once a week to take them away. All the while, no more had seen of Snowball. He was rumored to be hiding on one of the neighboring farms, either Foxwood or Pittsfield. Napoleon was, by this time, only slightly better terms with the other farmers than before. It happened that there was in a yard a pile of timber which had been stacked 10 years earlier when a beech spidey was cleared. It was well seasoned, and Whymper had advised Napoleon to sell it. Both Mr. Pilkington and Mr. Frederick were anxious to buy it. Napoleon was hesitating between the two, unable to make up his mind. It was noticed that whenever he seemed at the point of coming to an agreement with Frederick, Snowball had declared to be in hiding at Foxwood, while inclined towards Pilkington, Snowball was said to be at Pinchfield. Suddenly, early in the spring, an alarming thing was discovered. Snowball was secretly frequenting the farm by night. The animals were so disturbed that they could hardly sleep in their stalls. Every night, it was said, he would came creeping in under cover of darkness and performed all kinds of mischief there. He stole the corn, he upset the milk pails, he broke the eggs, he trampled the seed beds, he gnawed at the barks of the fruit trees. Whenever anything went wrong, it would become usual to attribute it to Snowball. If a window was broken or a drain was blocked up, someone was certain to say that Snowball had come in the night and done it. When the key of the store shed was lost, the whole farm was convinced that Snowball had thrown it down the well. Curiously enough, they went on believing this even after the misled key was found under a sack of meal. The cows declared unanimously that Snowball crept into their stalls and milked them in their sleep. The rats, which had been troublesome in the winter, they also said to be in league with Snowball. Napoleon decreed that there would be a full investigation into Snowball's activity. With his dogs in attendance, he set out and made a careful tour of inspection of the farm building, the other animals following at a respectful distance. Every few steps, Napoleon stopped and snuffed the ground for traces of Snowball's footsteps, which he said he could detect by the smell. He snuffed in every corner, in the bar, the cow shed, the hen houses, in the vegetable garden, and found traces of Snowball almost everywhere. He would put his snout to the ground, give several deep sniffs, and exclaim in a terrible voice, "Snowball, he has been here, I smell him distinctly." And the word Snowball, the dogs let out a curling growl and showed their side teeth. The animals were thoroughly frightened. It seemed as though Snowball were some kind of invisible influence pervading the air above them and menacing them of all kinds of dangers. In the evening, Squealer called them together and with an alarmed expression on his face told them that he had some serious news to report. "Comrades," cried Squealer, making a little nervous skips, A most terrible thing has been discovered. Snowball has sold himself to Frederick of Pinchfield Farm, who is even now plotting to attack us and give our farm away from us. Snowball is to act as his guide when the attack begins. But there is worse than that. We have thought that Snowball's rebellion was caused simply by his vanity and ambition, but we are wrong, comrades. Do you know the real reason was? Snowball was in league with Jones from the start. He was Jones's secret agent. All this time, it had been proved by documents which he had left behind him and only which had been discovered. To my mind, this explains a great deal, comrades. Did we not see ourselves how he attempted, fortunately without success, to get defeated and destroyed at the Battle of the Cowshed? The animals were stupefied. This was wickedness, far outgoing Snowball's destruction in the windmill. But it was some minutes before they could finally take it in. They all remembered, or thought they remembered, that they seen Snowball charging ahead of them at the Battle of the Cowshed. Stop eating things off the ground. Move, animal. Go. He's eating my grain off the ground. I have grain. I did not believe that, he said. Oh, wait. They all remembered, or thought they remembered, how they had seen Snowball charging ahead of them at the Battle of the Cowshed. How he rallied and even encouraged them at every turn, and how he had not paused for an instant, even when the pellets from Jones' gun had wounded him. At first, it was a little difficult to see how this fitted, being at Jones' side. Even Boxer, who seldom asked questions, was puzzled. He lay down, tucked his forehead beneath him, and shut his eyes, and with a hard effort managed to formulate his thoughts. I do not believe that, he said. Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed. I saw it myself. Did we not give him Animal Hero First Class immediately afterwards? That was our mistake, comrades. For we know now, it was written down in the secret documents that we have found, that in reality he was trying to lure us to our doom. But he was wounded, said Boxer. We all saw him running with blood. Oh, that's part of the arrangement, cried Squealer. Jones silently grazed him. I could show you this in his own writing if you were able to read it. The plot was for Snowball at the critical moment to give the signal to flight and leave the field of the enemy, who nearly succeeded. I will even say, comrade, he would have succeeded if it had not been for our heroic leader, Comrade Napoleon. Do you not remember how just at the moment when Jones and his men had gone inside the yard, Snowball suddenly turned and fled, many animals following him? Do you not remember, too, that if it was just at the moment when panic spread and it all seemed lost, that Comrade Napoleon sprang forward with a cry of death to humanity and sank his teeth into Jones's leg? Surely you remember that, comrades, exclaimed Squealer, frisking from side to side. Now, when Squealer described the scene so graphically, it seemed to the animals they did remember. At any rate, they remembered at the critical moment of the battle, Snowball had turned to flee, but Boxer was still a little uneasy. I do not believe that Snowball was a traitor. At the beginning, he said finally, what he has done since is different, but I believe at the Battle of the Cowshed he was a good comrade. Our leader, Comrade Napoleon, announced Squealer, speaking very slowly and firmly, has stated categorically, comrade, that Snowball was Jones's agent from the very beginning. Yes, and from long before the rebellion was ever thought of. Oh, that is different, said Boxer. If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. That is the spirit, comrade, cried Squealer, but it was not noticed. He cast a very ugly look at Boxer with those little twinkly eyes. He turned to go, then paused, and added impressively, I warned every animal on this farm to keep his eyes very wide open, for we have reason to think that some of Snowball's secret agents are lurking among us at this moment. 4 days later in the afternoon, Napoleon ordered all the animals to assemble in the yard. We all gathered together, and Napoleon emerged from the farmhouse wearing both his medals, as he had recently awarded himself, Animal Hero First Class and Animal Hero Second Class, with his 9 dogs, frisking round, uttering growls, and sent shivers down all the animals' spines. They all cowered silently in the places, seeming to know. Why is my eye so itchy? My eyes are like never itchy. Must be. I think it might be just my bangs. You look like your father, you cunt. Where am I? What's his name? 9 huge dogs frisking around him and uttering growls that sent shivers down the animals' spines. They all cowered silently in their places, seeming to know in advance that some terrible thing was about to happen. Napoleon stood sternly, surveying his audience, then he uttered a high-pitched whimper. Immediately, dogs bounded forward, seizing 4 of the pigs by the ear, and dragged them, squealing with pain and terror, to Napoleon's feet. The pigs' ears were bleeding, the dogs tasted blood, and in a few moments they appeared to go quite mad. To the amazement of everybody, 3 of them flung themselves upon Boxer. Boxer saw them coming in and put on his great hoof, caught a dog in midair, and pinned him to the ground. The dog shrieking for mercy, 2 others fled with their tails between their legs. Boxer looked at Napoleon to know whether he should crush the dog to death or let it go. Napoleon seemed to change countenance and sharply ordered Boxer to let the dog go, whereat Boxer lifted his hoof and the dog slunk away, bruised and howling. Presenting the tumult died down. The 4 pigs waited, trembling, with guilty written on every line of their countenances. Napoleon now called them upon to confess their crimes. They were the same 4 pigs that had protested when Napoleon abolished the Sunday meetings. With any further prompting, they confessed that they had secretly in touch with Snowball ever since his expulsion, and they had collaborated with him in destroying the windmill, and that they had entered into agreement with him to overhand Animal Farm to Mr. Frederick. They added that Snowball was privately admitting to them that he had been Jones's secret agent for years past. When they had finished their confession, the dogs promptly tore their throats out in a terrible voice. Napoleon demanded whether any other animal had anything to confess. The 3 hens who had been ringleaders in the attempted rebellion over the eggs now came forward and stated that Snowball had appeared in them in a dream and enticed them to disobey Napoleon's orders. They too were slaughtered. Then a goose came forward and confessed to have secreted 6 ears of corn during the last year's harvest and eaten them in the night. And a sheep confessed to having urinated in the drinking pool, surged to do this, so she said, by Snowball. And 2 other sheep confessed to having murdered an old ram, an especially devout follower of Napoleon, by chasing him round and round a bonfire when he was suffering from a cough. They were all slain on the spot. And so the tale of confessions and executions went on until there was a pile of corpses laying before Napoleon's feet, and the air was heavy with the smell of blood, which was unknown there since the expulsion of Jones. When it was all over, the remaining animals, except for the pigs and dogs, crept away in a body. They were shaken and miserable. They did not know which was more shocking, the treachery of the animal who had leagued themselves with Snowball, or the cruel retribution they had witnessed. In the old days, they often been scenes of bloodshed equally terrible, but it seemed to them that they were far worse now than it had been happening themselves. Since Jones left the farm until today, no animal had been killed by another animal. Not even a rat had been killed. They had made their way on their little knoll where the half-finished windmill stood. On one accord, all lay down as though huddling together for warmth. Clover, Muriel, Benjamin, the cows, the sheep, and the flock of geese and hens, everyone indeed except the cat, would suddenly disappear just before Napoleon ordered the animals to assemble. For some time nobody spoke. Only Vox remained on his feet. He fidgeted to and fro, swishing his long black tail side to side, occasionally uttering a whinny of surprise. Finally said, "I do not understand it. I would not have believed that such things could happen on our farm. It must be due to some fault of ourselves. But the solution, I see, is to work harder. From now onwards I shall get up at a full hour earlier in the mornings." And he moved off to his lumbering trot and made for the quarry. Having got there, he collected 2 successful loads of stone and dragged them down to the windmill before retiring for the night. The animals huddled about Clover, not speaking. The knoll they were lying gave them a wide prospect from the countryside. Most of Animal Farm was within their view, the old pasture stretching down to the main road, the hayfield, the spinney, the drinking pool, the plowed fields where the young wheat was thick and green, and the red roof from the farm buildings and the smoke curling from the chimney. It was a clear spring evening. The grass and the bursting hedges were gilded by the level rays of the sun. Never had the farm, and with a kind of surprise they remembered that it was their own farm, every inch of it their own property, appeared to the animals so desirable a place. As Clover looked down at the country at the hillside, her eyes filled with tears. If she could have spoken her thoughts, it would have been to say that this was not what they had aimed at when they had set themselves years ago to work to overthrow the human race. These scenes of terror and slaughter were not what they had looked forward to on that night when old Major first stirred them to rebellion. If she herself had any picture of the future, been of a society of animals were set free from hunger and of the whip, all equal, all working according to his capacity, the strong protecting the weak, as she protected the lost brute of ducklings from her foreleg the night of Major's speech. Instead, she did not know why, they had come to a time when no one dared speak his mind, when fierce, growling dogs roamed everywhere, and when you had to watch your comrades torn to pieces after confessing to shocking crimes. There was no thought of rebellion or disobedience in her mind. She knew that, even as things were, they were far better than they had been in the years of Jones, and that before all else it was needful to prevent the return of the human beings. Whatever happened, she would remain faithful, work hard, carry out the orders that were given to her, accept the leadership of Napoleon. But still, it was not for this that she, all the animals, had hoped and toiled. It was not for the day that they had built. It was not for this that they had built the windmill and faced the bullets of Jones' gun. Such were her thoughts, though she lacked the words to express them. At last, feeling this is some ways a substitute for the words she was unable to find, she began to sing "Beasts of England." The other animals sitting around her took it up. They sang it 3 times over, very tunefully, but slowly and mournfully, in a way they had never sung it before. They had just finished singing, too, for the 3rd time, when Squealer, attended by 2 dogs, approached them with the air of having something important to say. He announced that by a special decree of Comrade Napoleon, Beasts of England was abolished from now onwards. It was forbidden to sing. The animals were taken aback. Why? "It's no longer needed, comrade," said Squealer. "Beasts of England" was a song about a rebellion. But the rebellion is now completed. The execution of the traitors this afternoon was the final act. The enemy, both external and internal, have been defeated. In Beasts of England we expressed our longing for a better society in days to come. But that society has now been established. Clearly, this song has no longer any purpose. Frightened though they were, some of the animals might possibly have protested, but at that moment the sheep set up their usual bleating, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, which went on for several minutes and put an end to the discussion. But So Beast of England was never heard no more. In its place, Minimus, the poet, composed another song which began, Animal farm, never through me shalt thou come to harm. And this was sung every Sunday, the hoisting of the flag, with some other words, nor the tune ever seemed to the animals to come up to the beasts of England. Chapter 8. A few days later, when the terror caused by the execution had died down, some of the animals remembered, or thought they remembered, that the 6th commandment declared no animal shall kill any other animal. And though no one cared to mention it at the hearing of the pigs or the dogs, it was felt that the killing had been taking place. Did not square with this. Clara asked Benjamin to read her the 6th commandment, and Benjamin, as usual, said he refused to meddle in such matters. She fetched Muriel. Muriel read the commandments for her. It ran, no animal shall kill any other animal without cause. Somehow or other, the last 2 words slipped from the animal's memory, but they saw now that the commandment was not violated, for clearly there was good reason for killing traitors who have leagued themselves with Snowball. Throughout the entire year, the animals worked even harder than they had worked in the previous year, to rebuild the windmill with walls twice as thick as before, and to finish it by the appointed date, together in the regular work of the farm, was a tremendous labor. There were times when it seemed to the animals that they had worked longer hours and fed no better than they had done in Jones's day. On Sunday morning, Squealer, holding down a strip of paper with his trotter, would read out lists of figures providing the production of every year of foodstuff had increased by 200%, 300%, or 500%, as the case might be. The animals saw no reason to disbelieve him, especially as they could no longer remember very clearly what conditions had been like before the rebellion. All the same, there were days when they felt they had sooner and less figures and more food. All orders were now issued through Squealer and one of the other pigs. Napoleon himself not seen in a public as often as a fortnight. When he did appear, he was attended not only by a retinue of dogs. Retinue? I fucking tripped over the word retinue. Fuck you. Retinue. But a black cockerel who marched in front of him and acted as a sort of trumpeter, letting out a loud cock-a-doodle-doo before Napoleon spoke. Even the farmhouse, it was said, Napoleon inhabited separate apartments from the others. He took his meals alone with 2 dogs to wait upon him, and always ate from the crown-dirty dinner service, which had been in the glass cupboard in the drawing room. It was also announced that the gun would be fired every year on Napoleon's birthday, as well as the other 2 anniversaries. Napoleon was now never spoken of as simply Napoleon. He was always referred to in formal style of our leader, Comrade Napoleon, and the pigs liked to invent for him such titles as father of all animals, terror of mankind, protector of the sheepfold, duckling's friend, and the like. In his speeches, Squealer would talk of the tears rolling down his cheeks, of Napoleon's wisdom, the goodness of his heart, and the deep love he bore for all animals everywhere, even and especially the unhappy animals who still lived in ignorance and slavery on other farms. It had become usual to give Napoleon the credit for every successful achievement and every stroke of good fortune. You would often hear one hen remark to another, "Under the guidance of our leader, Comrade Napoleon, I have laid five eggs in 6 days." Or cows enjoying a drink of the pool would exclaim, "Thanks to the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, how excellent this water tastes." And general feeling of the farm was well expressed in a poem entitled Comrade Napoleon, composed by Minimus, and which ran as followed: "Friend of fatherless, fountain of happiness, Lord of the still bucket, and of how my soul is on. Fire when I gaze at thy calm and commanding eye, like the sun in the sky, comrade Napoleon. Thou art a giver of all that thy creatures love. Full belly twice a day, clean straw to roll upon. Every beast, great or small, sleeps at peace in his stall, that thou watchest over all, comrade Napoleon. Had I a sucking pig, to had he grown as big, even as a pint bottle or as a rolling pin, he should have learned to be faithful and true to thee. Yes, his first squeak should be Comrade Napoleon. Napoleon appeared of this poem, approved. Oh, sorry. Give me a second. Napoleon approved of this poem and caused it to be inscribed on the walls of the big farm in the opposite end of the Seven Commandments. It was surmounted by a portrait of Napoleon in profile executed by a squealer in white paint. Meanwhile, with the agency of Whymper, Napoleon was engaged in complicated negotiation with Frederick and Pinkelton. The pile of timber was still unsold. Of the two, Frederick was more anxious to get hold of it, but he would not offer a reasonable price. At the same time, there were renewed rumors that Frederick and his men were plotting to attack Animal Farm and destroy the windmill, building of which had roused furious jealousy in him. Snowball was known to be skulking in the Pinchfield farm in the middle of the summer. The animals were alarmed to hear that their hands had come forward and confessed. Inspired by Snowball, they had entered into a plot to murder Napoleon. They were executed immediately, and fresh precautions for Napoleon's safety were taken. 4 dogs guarded his bed at night, 1 at each corner, and a young pig named Pink Eye was given the task of tasting all his food before he ate it, lest it should be poisoned. At about the same time, it was given out that Napoleon had arranged to sell the pile of timber to Pinkelton. He was also going to enter... Fucking eye. Don't have long bangs. They make your eyes itch. He was going to enter into a regular agreement with the exchange of certain products between the Animal Farm and Foxwood. The relation between Napoleon and Pinkelton, though they were only conducted through Whymper, were now almost friendly. The animals distrusted Pinkelton as a human being, but greatly preferred him to Frederick, whom they both feared and hated. As the summer wore on, and the windmill near completion, the rumors of an impending treacherous attack grew stronger and stronger. Stronger and stronger. I'm like fucking losing my fucking mind. I cut my hair. It's not finished. Right now I look like have like a Ramona Flowers kind of thing going on. It's not the intention. This district said to intend to bring... Oh, as the summer wore on and the windmill near completed, the rumors of an impending treacherous attack grew stronger and stronger. Frederick, it was said, intended to bring against them 20 men, all armed with guns. He had already bribed the magistrates and the police, so that if he could get a hold of the title deed of Animal Farm, they would ask no questions. Moreover, terrible stories were leaking out from Pinchfield of the cruelties that Frederick practiced upon his animals. He was flogged an old horse to death. He starved his cows. He had killed a dog by throwing it into a furnace. He amused himself in the evenings by making cockfights with splinters of razor blades tied to their spurs. The animals' blood boiled with rage when they had heard of these things being done to their comrades, and sometimes they clamored to be allowed to go out into a body and attack Pinchfield Farm, drive out the humans, and set the animals free. Yet Squealer counseled them to avoid rash actions. Trust in Comrade Napoleon's strategy. Nevertheless, feeling against Frederick continued to grow high. One Sunday morning, Napoleon appeared in the barn and explained that he had never, in any time, contemplated selling a pile of timber to Frederick. He considered it beneath his dignity, he said. Such dealings with scoundrels of that description, the pigeons who were still sent out to spread tidings of the rebellion were forbidden to set foot anywhere on Foxwood, and were ordered to drop their former slogan of death to humanity in favor of death to Frederick. In the late summer, yet another Snowball's machines was laid bare. The wheat crop was full of weeds. 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 It was discovered that on one of his nocturnal visits, Snowball had mixed weed seeds with seed corn. A gander who had been privy to the plot had confessed his guilt to Squealer and immediately committed suicide by swallowing deadly nightshade berries. The animals now also learned that Snowball had never, as many of them had believed hitherto, received the order of Animal Hero First Class. That was merely a legend. A legend that was spread before the Battle of the Cowshed by Snowball himself. So far from being decorated, he had been censured for showing cowardice in the battle. Once again, some animals heard that certain bewilderment, but Squealer was able to convince them that all their memories had been at fault. In the autumn, by a tremendous, exhausting effort, for the harvest had to be gathered at almost the same time, the windmill was finished, the machinery had been installed, and Whymper was negotiating with purchasing of it. For the structure was completed. In the teeth of every difficulty, in spite of inexperience, of primitive implements, of bad luck, and of Snowball's treachery, the work had been finished, punctually to the very day. Tired out but proud, the animals walked around their masterpiece and appeared even more beautiful in their eyes than it had ever been built in the first time. Moreover, the walls were twice as thick as before. Nothing short of explosives Nothing short of explosives would lay low this time, and when they thought of how they were labored, how discouragements they had overcome, and the enormous differences that they had made in their lives, with the sails returning and the dominoes running, and they had thought of all this, their tiredness forsook them, and they gobbled round and round the windmill, uttering cries of triumph. Napoleon himself, attending by his dogs and his cockerel, came down to inspect the completed work. He personally congratulated the animals on their achievement and announced that the windmill would be called Napoleon Mill. 2 days later, the animals were called together for a special meeting in the barn. They were struck dumb with surprise when Napoleon announced that he had sold the pile of timber to Frederick. Tomorrow, Frederick's wagons would arrive and begin carting it away. Through the whole period of his ensuing friendship with Pickleton, Napoleon was really in secret agreement with Frederick. A relation with Foxwood had broken off. Insulting messages had been sent to Pickleton. The pigeons were told to avoid Pinchfield Farm and to alter their slogan from death to Frederick to death to Pickleton. At the same time, Napoleon assured the animals that the stories of the impending attack on Animal Farm were completely untrue, and other tales about Frederick's cruelty to his animals have been greatly exaggerated. All those rumors had probably originated from Snowball and his agents, and it has now appeared that Snowball was not, after all, hiding in Pinchfield Farm, and in fact had never been there in his life. He was living in considerable luxury, so it was said, at Foxwood, and in reality been a finisher of Pickleton for years. The pigs were in ecstasies over Napoleon's cunning. By seeming to be friendly with Pickleton, he had forced Frederick to raise his price by £12, but The superior quality of Napoleon's mind, said Squealer, was shown in the fact that he trusted nobody, not even Frederick. Frederick had wanted to pay by the timber with something called a check, which it seemed was a piece of paper with a promise to pay written upon it. But Napoleon was too clever for him. He was demanding payment in real £5 notes, which were to be handed out before the timber was removed. Already Frederick had paid up, and the sum he paid was just enough to buy the machinery from the windmill. Meanwhile, the timber was being carted away at high speed. While it was all gone, another special meeting was held in the barn with the animals to inspect Frederick's banknotes. Smiling beautifully, sorry, it's hard to see. My hair is getting too long. Except the part that I cut. Wearing both his decorations, Napoleon reposed on a bed of straw on the platform with the money at his side, neatly piled on a china dish from the farmhouse kitchen. The animals filed slowly past, and each gazed his fill. And Boxer put out his nose to sniff the banknotes, and the flimsy white things stirred and rustled in his breath. 3 days later was a terrible hubbub. What the fuck? Okay. To anyone who doesn't, to my two, who's here? Okay, some guy on Twitch is here. Okay, guy on Twitch. Why is hubbaloo a word? Why is hubbaloo a word? That's like the stupidest English word I've ever had to read aloud to another human being. Hubbaloo, hubbaloo, hubbaloo. Why is that a word? Hubbaloo, hubbaloo. Nonsense. It means nothing. 3 days later, there was a terrible hullabaloo. Whimper, his face deathly pale, came racing to the path on his bicycle, flung it down in the yard, and rushed straight into the farmhouse. The next moment, a choking roar of rage sounded like Napoleon's apartment. The news of what was happening sped round the farm like wildfire. The banknotes were forgeries. Frederick had got the timber for nothing. Napoleon called the animals together immediately and in a terrible voice pronounced the death sentence upon Frederick. When captured, he said Frederick would be boiled alive. At the same time, he warned them after the treacherous deed, the worst was to be expected. Frederick and his men might make their way. Long-expected attack at any moment. Sentinels were placed at all approaches by the farm. In addition, 4 pigeons were sent to Foxwood with a conciliatory message, to which they hoped might re-establish good relations with Pinkleton. The very next morning the attack came. The animals were at breakfast when the outlooks came racing in with the news that Frederick and his followers had already come through the 5-barred gate. Boldly enough, the animals sallied forth to meet them. But this time they did not have an easy victory that they had in the Battle of the Cowshed. There were 15 men with half a dozen guns between them, and they opened fire as soon as they got within 50 yards. The animals could not face the terrible explosions and stirring pellets, and in spite of the efforts of Napoleon and Boxer to rally them, they were soon driven back. A number of them were already wounded. They took refuge in the farm buildings and peeped cautiously out from chinks in knotholes. The whole of the big pasture, including the windmill, was in the hands of this enemy. In a moment, even Napoleon seemed at a loss. He paced up and down without a word, his tail rigid and switching. Wistful glances would set in the direction of Foxwood. Pinkleton and his men would help them. The day might be won yet. But at this moment, the 4 pigeons who had been sent out on the day returned. One of them, bearing a scrap of paper from Pinkleton. On it was penciled the word, "Serves you right." Meanwhile, Frederick and his men had halted about the windmill. The animals watched them, and a murmur of dismay went round. 2 of the men had produced a crowbar and a sledgehammer. They were going to knock the windmill down. Impossible, cried Napoleon. We have built the walls far too thick for that. You cannot knock it down in a week. Courage, comrades! But Benjamin was watching the movements of the men intently. The two with the hammer and the crowbar were drilling a hole near the base of the windmill. Slowly, and with the air almost of amusement, Benjamin nodded his long muzzle. I thought so, he said. Do you not see what they are doing? At any moment they are going to pack blasting powder into that hole. Terrified, the animals waited. It was impossible now to venture out of the shelter of the buildings. After a few minutes, the men were seen to be running in all directions. There were deafening roar. The pigeons swirled in the air, and all the animals except Napoleon flung themselves flat on their bellies and hid their faces. When they got up again, a huge cloud of black smoke was hanging around the windmill. Had been. Slowly, the breeze drifted it away. The windmill had ceased to exist. At this sight, the animals' courage returned to them. The fear and despair they had felt a moment earlier was drowned by rage against this vile, contemptible act. A mighty cry of vengeance went up, and without waiting for further orders, they charged forth in a body and made straight for the enemy. The time they did not heed the cruel pellets that swept over them like hail. It was a savage, bitter battle. The men fired again and again, and when the animals got to close quarters, lashed out with their sticks and their heavy boots. A cow, 3 sheep, and 2 geese were killed, and nearly everyone wounded. Even Napoleon, who was directing orders from the rear, had the tip of his tail chipped by a pellet. But the men did not go unscathed either. 3 of them had their heads broken by blows from Boxer's hooves. Another was gored in the belly by a cow's horn. Another had trousers nearly torn off by Jessie and the Bluebell. And when the 9 dogs of Napoleon's own bodyguard, whom he had instructed to make a detour under cover around the hedge, suddenly appeared at the men's flank, baying ferociously, panic overtook them. They saw that they were in danger of being surrounded. Frederick shouted to his men to get out while they still were in the while the going was good. The next moment, the cowardly enemy was running for dear life. The animals chased them right down to the bottom of the field and back to the last kicks that they forced their way through the thorn hedge. They had won, but they were weary and bleeding. Slowly they began to limp backwards towards the farm. The sight of the dead comrades stretched upon the grass moved some of them to tears. For a while it was halted in silence in the place the windmill had once stood. Yes, it was gone. Almost the last trace of their labor was gone. Even the foundation was partially destroyed. And in rebuilding, if they could not think at this time, as before, make use of the fallen stones. The time the stones had vanished too, the force of the explosion had flung them in distances of hundreds of yards. It was as though the windmill had never been. They approached the farm. Squealer, who had unaccountably been absent during the fighting, came skipping towards them, whisking his tail and beaming with satisfaction. And the animals heard from the direction of the farm building the solemn booming of a gun. What was the gun firing for? Said Boxer. To celebrate our victory, cried Squealer. What victory? Said Boxer. His knees were bleeding. He had lost his shoe and split his hoof, and a dozen pellets had lodged themselves in his hind legs. What victory, comrade? Have we not driven the enemy off the soil, the sacred soil of Animal Farm? But they destroyed the windmill, and we had worked on it for 2 years. What matter? We build another windmill. We will build 6 windmills if we like it. You do not appreciate, comrade, the mighty thing that we have done. The enemy was in occupation of this very ground that we stand upon, and now, thanks to the leadership of Comrade Napoleon, we have won every inch of it back again. We have won back what we had before, said Boxer. That is our victory, said Squealer. They limped down to the yard. The pellets under the skin of Boxer's legs smarted painfully. He saw ahead of him the heavy labors of rebuilding the windmill, the foundations, and already in imagination he braced himself in the task. For the first time it occurred to him that he was 11 years old, and that perhaps his great muscles were not quite what they had been once before. And when the animal saw the green flag flying and heard the gun firing again, 7 times it was fired in all, and heard the speech Napoleon made, congratulating them on their conduct, it seemed to them, after all, they had won a great victory. The animals slain in battle were given a solemn funeral. Boxer and Clover pulled the wagon which served as a hearse, and Napoleon himself walked the head of the procession. 2 whole days were given over to celebrations. There were songs, speeches, and more firings of the gun, and a special gift of an apple was bestowed on every animal, with 2 ounces of cords for each bird and 3 biscuits for each dog. It was announced that the battle would be called the Battle of the Windmill, and Napoleon had created a new decoration, the Order of the Green Banner, which he conferred upon himself. In the great rejoicing in the unfortunate affairs, the banknotes were forgotten. It was a few days later that the pigs came upon a case of whiskey in the cellar of the farmhouse. It had been overlooked at the time when the house was first occupied. The night they came from the farmhouse, the sound of loud singing, to which everyone's surprised the strains of Beasts of England were mixed up. At 9:30, Napoleon, wearing an old bowler's hat of Mr. Jones, was distinctly seen to emerge from the back door, gallop rapidly round the yard, and disappear indoors. But in the morning, a deep silence hung over the farmhouse. Not a pig appeared to be stirring. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Squealer made his appearance, walking slowly and ejecting his eyes dull, his tail hanging limply behind him. It was every appearance of being seriously ill. He called the animals together and told them he had terrible news to impart. Comrade Napoleon was dying. A cry of lamentation went up. Straw was laid down outside the door of the farmhouse, and the animals walked on tiptoes with tears in their eyes. They asked one another what they should do if their leader were taken away from them. A rumor went around that Snowball had contrived to introduce poison within Napoleon's food. At 11 o'clock, Squealer came out to make another announcement at his last act upon earth. Comrade Napoleon had pronounced a solemn decree. The drinking of alcohol was to be punished by death. By the evening, however, Napoleon appeared to be somewhat better, and the following morning Squealer was able to tell them that he was well on the way to recovery. By the evening of that day, Napoleon was back at work. On the next day, it was learned that he was instructed Whymper to purchase in Wellington some booklets of brewing and distilling. A week later, Napoleon gave orders that the small paddock beyond the orchard, which had previously been intended to set aside as a grazing ground for animals who were past work, to be plowed up. It was given out that the pasture was exhausted and needed reseeding, but soon became known that Napoleon intended to sow it with barley. About this time, there occurred a strange incident which hardly anyone was able to understand. One night, at about 12 o'clock, there was a loud crash in the yard, and the animals rushed out to their stalls. It was a moonlit night. At the foot of the end of the wall of the big barn, there were 7 commands were written. There lay a ladder broken in 2 pieces. Squealer, temporarily stunned, was sprawled beside it, and near the hand there lay a lantern, a paintbrush, an overturned pot of white paint. The dogs immediately made a ring around Squealer and escorted him back to the farmhouse as soon as he was able to walk. None of the animals could form any idea as to what this meant, except old Benjamin, who nodded his muzzle with a knowing air and seemed to understand, but would say nothing. He would say nothing. Take that, bitches. By the evening, however, Napoleon appeared to be somewhat better. The morning Squealer... Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But a few days later, Muriel, reading over the 10 Commandments to herself, noticed that there was yet another of them which the animals had remembered wrong. There had been a 5th commandment which said, no animal shall drink alcohol. There's 2 words that have been forgotten. Actually, the commandment read, no animal shall drink alcohol to excess. Chapter 1X. I forgot what 1X stood for. I don't remember where I am. Oh, chapter 9. We're almost finished. 2 more chapters. Boxer's split hoof was a long time in healing. They started rebuilding the windmill the day after the victory of the celebration had ended. Boxer refused to have taken a day off work and made it a point of honor not to let it be seen that he was in pain. In the evenings, he would admit privately to Clover that the hoof troubled him a great deal. Clover treated the hoof with poultices of herbs, which she prepared by chewing them, and both she and Benjamin urged Boxer to work less hard. A horse's lungs do not last forever, she said to him. But Boxer would not listen. He said only real ambition left to see the windmill well under way before he reached the age of retirement. At the beginning, with the laws of the animal farm were first formulated, the retiring age had been fixed for horses and pigs at 12, for cows at 14, for dogs at 9, for sheep at 7, and for hens and geese at 5. Liberal old age pensions were agreed upon. As yet no animal had actually retired on pension, but of late the subject had been discussed more and more. Now the small field beyond the orchard had been set aside for barley. It was rumored that a corner of the large pasture was to be fenced off and turned into a grazing ground for superannuated animals. For a horse, who said the pension was 5 pounds of corn a day, in winter 15 pounds of hay with a carrot or possibly an apple on public holidays. Boxer's 12th birthday was due in the last summer of the following year. Meanwhile, life was hard, the winter was cold, this last one, and food was even shorter. Once again, all rations were reduced except those of the pigs and dogs. A too rigid equality in rations, Squealer exclaimed, was on the contrary the principles of animalism. In any case, she had no difficulty in proving to the other animals that they were not in reality short of food, whatever the appearances might be. For the time being, certainly, it was found necessary to make readjustments of rations. Squealer always spoke of readjustments and not reductions. But in comparison to the days of Jones, the improvement was enormous. Reading out the figures in a shrill, rapid voice, he proved to them in detail that they had more oats, more hay, more turnips than they had in Jones's days, that they had worked shorter hours, and that their drinking water was of better quality, and that they lived longer. A large portion of their young ones survived infancy, and they had more straw in their stalls and suffered less from fleas. The animals believed every word of it. Truth to tell, Jones and all he stood for was almost faded out of their memories. They knew that life nowadays was harsh and bare, but they were often hungry and often cold, and that wasn't even. I was like putting words together that didn't belong to. They were often hungry, and they were usually working when they were not asleep. But doubtless, even worse in the old days, they were glad to believe so. Besides, in those days they had been slaves, and now they were free. And it made all the difference, as Squealer did not fail to point out. There are many more mouths to feed now. In the autumn, the 4 sows have been littered simultaneously, producing 31 young pigs between them. The young pigs were piebald, and as Napoleon was the only boar on the farm, it was possible to guess at their parentage. It was announced later that when bricks and timber were purchased, a schoolroom would be built in the farmhouse garden. For the time being, the young pigs were given instruction by Napoleon himself in the farmhouse kitchen. They took their exercise in the garden and were discouraged from playing with other young animals. Someone donated or something. Thank you. I will. I'm trying not to break character as much as possible, but yeah, thanks. Dude. For those coming in, I'm reading, this is the last 2 chapters of Animal Farm by George Orwell. It's just a book about pigs running a farm and nothing else. Nothing more deep to read into it. Just about a farm run by animals. The farm had a fairly successful year, but short on money. There were brick ends, sand, and lime to the schoolroom to be purchased, and it was also to be necessary to begin saving up again for the machinery of the windmill. Then there were a lamp oil and candles for the house sugar for Napoleon's own table, for he had begged this to the other pigs on the ground that it made them fat. And all the usual replacements such as tools, nails, string, coal, wire, strap iron, and dog biscuits. A stump of hay and a part of the potato crop was sold off, and the contract for eggs was increased to 600 a week. So that year the hens barely hatched enough chicks to keep their numbers at the same level. Rations reduced in December. When reduced again in February, the lanterns in the stalls were forbidden to save oil. But the pigs seemed comfortable enough, and in fact were putting on weight, if anything. One afternoon in late February, a warm, rich, appeasing scent, such as the animals had never smelt before, wafted itself into the yard from the little brewhouse, which was disused in Jones's time, and which stood beyond the kitchen. Someone said it was the smell of cooking barley. The animals sniffed the air hungrily and wondered whether a warm mash was being prepared for their supper. But no warm mash appeared. And the following Sunday it was announced that from now onwards all barley was reserved for the pigs. The field beyond the orchard was already had been sown for with barley, and the new seeked out of every pig are now receiving a ration of a pint of beer daily with half a gallon of Napoleon himself, which was always served to him in the crown dirty soup tureen. There were hardships to be borne. They were partly offset by the fact that life nowadays was greater dignity than it had before. There are more songs, more speeches, more processions. Napoleon had commanded out. Once a week there shall be held some called a spontaneous demonstration, the object of which was to celebrate the struggles and triumphs of Animal Farm. At the appointed time, the animals would leave their work and march around the precedence of the farm in military fashion, with the pigs leading, then the horses, then the cows, then the sheep, and then the poultry. Dogs flanked the procession, and at the head of all the march, Napoleon's black cockerel. Boxer and Clover always carried between them a great banner marked with the hoof and the horn, the caption, "Long live Comrade Napoleon." Afterwards there were recitations of poems composed in Napoleon's honor, and a speech by Squealer giving particulars of the latest increases of the production of foodstuffs. On occasions a shot was fired from the gun. The sheep were greater devotees of the spontaneous demonstration, and if anyone complained, as a few animals sometimes did when no pigs or dogs were near, they wasted time and meant a lot of standing around in the cold, the sheep were sure to silence him with a tremendous bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And by large, the animals enjoyed their celebrations. They found it comforting to be reminded that, after all, they were truly their own masters, and that the work they did was for their own benefit. So that, with the songs and the processions, Squealer's list of figures, the thunders of the gun, the crowing of the crocodile, and the fluttering of the flag, they were able to forget that their bellies were empty at least part of the time. In April, Animal Farm was proclaimed a republic. It was necessary to elect a president. There was only one candidate, Napoleon, who was elected unanimously, and on the same day it was given out that fresh documents had discovered unraveled further details about Snowball's complicity with Jones. It appeared that Snowball had not, as the animals had previously imagined, merely attempted to lose the battle of the cowshed. Merely attempted to lose it by stratagem, but had been openly fighting on Jones's side. In fact, it was he who had actually been the leader of the human forces, and had charged into battle with the words, "Long live humanity," on his lips. The wound on Snowball's back, which was few of the animals still remembered to have seen, had been inflicted by Napoleon's teeth. In the middle of the summer, Moses the raven suddenly reappeared in the farm after an absence of several years. He was quite unchanged, still did no work, and talked in the strain as ever about Sugar Candy Mountain. He would perch on a stump, flap his black wings, and talk by the hour to anyone who would listen. "Up there, comrades," he would say solemnly, pointing at the sky with a large beak. "Up there, just on the other side of the dark cloud." Thank you for the donation. I will privately thank everyone who donated after stream. Thank you, though. Appreciate it. Up there, just on the other side of the dark cloud, you can see, there it is, Sugar Candy Mountain. The happy country where we poor animals shall rest forever from our labors. He even claimed to have been there on one of the highest flights and seen the everlasting field of clover and linseed cake and lump sugar growing on the hedges. Many of the animals believed him. Their lives now they reasoned were hungry and laborious. Was it not right, and just that a better world should exist somewhere else? The thing that was difficult to determine was the attitude of the pigs toward Moses. They all declared contemptuously that his stories of Sugar Candy Mountain were lies, yet they allowed him to remain on the farm, not working with allowance of a gill of beer a day. After his hoof was healed up, Boxer worked harder than ever. Indeed, all the animals worked like slaves that year. Apart from the regular work on the farm and the rebuilding the windmill, there were schoolhouses for the young pigs, which had started in March. Sometimes the long hours of insufficient food was hard to bear, but Boxer never faltered. In nothing he said or did there was any sign in his strength of not what had been. It was only his appearance that was little altered. His hide was less shiny than it used to be, and his great haunches seemed to be shrunken. The others said Boxer was still will pick up when the spring grass comes on, but spring came and Boxer grew no fatter. Sometimes on the slope leading on the top of the quarry, he braced his muscles against the weight of the vast boulders. It seemed that nothing kept him on his feet except the will to continue, and at times his lips were seen to form the words, "I will work harder." He had no voice left. Once again, Clover and Benjamin warned him to take care of his health, but Boxer paid no attention. His 12th birthday was approaching. He did not care what happened so long as a good store of stone was accumulated before he went on pension. Late one evening on the summer, a sudden rumor round the farm that something had happened to Boxer. He had gone out alone to drag a load of stone down the windmill. And sure enough, the rumor was true. A few moments later, 2 pigeons came racing in with the news, "Boxer has fallen. He's lying on his side and can't get up." About half the animals on the farm rushed out to the knoll where the windmill stood. There lay Boxer between the shafts of the cart, his neck stretched out, unable to even raise his head. His eyes were glazed, his eyes matted with sweat. His sides were matted with sweat, not his eyes. A thin stream of blood trickled out of his mouth. Clover dropped to her knees by his side. "Boxer," she cried, "how are you?" "It is my lung," said Boxer in a weak voice. "It does not matter. I think you will be able to finish the windmill without me. There is a pretty good store of stone accumulated. I had only another month to go in any case. To tell the truth, I've been looking forward to my retirement, and perhaps as Benjamin is growing old too, they will let him retire at the same time and be a companion to me. We must get help at once, said Clover. Run, somebody, and tell Squealer what happened. All the animals immediately raced back to the farmhouse to give Squealer the news. Only Clover remained, and Benjamin, who lay at Boxer's side, and without speaking, kept the flies off him with his long tail. About a quarter of an hour, Squealer appeared, full of sympathy and concern. He said that Comrade Napoleon has learned the very deepest distress that the misfortune to one of the most loyal workers on the farm was already making arrangement to send Boxer to be treated at a hospital in Willingdon. The animals felt a little uneasy at this. Except for Molly and Snowball, no other animal had ever left the farm, and they did not like to think of their sick comrade in the hands of human beings. However, Squealer easily convinced them that the veterinary surgeon in Willingdon could treat Boxer's case more satisfactorily than they had done on the farm. About half an hour later, when Boxer was somewhat recovered, he was with difficulty got on his feet and managed to limp back to his stall, where Clover and Benjamin prepared a good bed of straw for him. For the next 2 days, Boxer remained in his stall. The pigs had sent out a large bottle of pink medicine, which they found in the medicine cabinet of the bathroom, and Clover administered it to Boxer twice a day after meals. In the evening, she lay in his stall and talked to him. When Benjamin kept the flies off him, Boxer professed not to be sorry for what happened. If he made a good recovery, he might expect to live another 3 years, and he looked forward to the peaceful days he would spend in the corner of the big pasture. It would be the first time he had leisure to study and improve his mind. He intended, he said, to devote the rest of his time to learning the remaining 22 letters of the alphabet. However, Benjamin and Clover could only be with Boxer after working hours, and it was the middle of the day when the van came to take him away. The animals were all at work weeding turnips under the supervision of a pig when they astonished to see Benjamin being galloped in the direction of the farm building, braying at the top of his voice. It was the first time anyone had seen him gallop. "Quick, quick," he shouted, "come at once. They are taking Boxer away." Without waiting for orders from the pigs, the animals broke off work and raced down to the farm building. Sure enough, there in the yard was a large closed van drawn by 2 horses with letterings on the side, a sly-looking man in a low-crowned bowler hat sitting on the driver's seat, and Boxer's stall was empty. The animals crowded around the van. "Goodbye, Boxer," they chorused. "Goodbye." "Fools, fools," shouted Benjamin, prancing around them and stamping the earth with his small hoofs. "Fools, do you not see what is written on the side of the van?" They gave the animals pause, and there was a hush. Muriel began to spell out the words, but Benjamin pushed her aside. In the midst of a deadly silence, he read, "Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler, Wildington, dealer in hide and bone meal. Kennels supplied." "Do you not understand what that means? They are taking Boxer to the knackers." A cry of horror burst into all the animals at this moment, and the man of the box whipped up his horses, and the van moved out of the yard at a small trot. All the animals followed, crying over the top of their voices. Clover forced her way to the front. The van began to gather speed. Clover tried to stir her stout limbs to a gallop and achieved a banter. "Boxer!" she cried. "Boxer, Boxer, Boxer!" Just at that moment, as though he had learned the uproar outside, Boxer's face with the white stripe down his nose appeared at the small window at the back of the van. "Boxer!" she cried in a terrible voice. "Boxer, get out! Get out quickly! They are taking you to your death!" And all the animals took out a cry, "Get out, Boxer! Get out!" But the van was already gathering speed and drawing away from them. It was uncertain whether Boxer understood what Clover had said, but a moment later his face disappeared from the window, and there was the sound of a tremendous drumming of hooves inside the van. He was trying to kick his way out. The time had been a few kicks from Boxer's hoofs would smash the van to match wood, but alas, his strength had left him. A few moments away, The sound of drumming hooves grew fainter and died away. In desperation, the animals began appealing to the two horses who drew the van to stop. Comrades, comrades, they shouted, don't take your brother to his death. But the stupid brutes, too ignorant to realize what was happening, merely set us, packed their ears, and quickened their pace. Boxer's face did not reappear in the window. Too late, someone thought of racing ahead and shutting the 5-barred gate. In another moment, the van was gone through it and rapidly disappearing beyond the road. Boxer was never seen again. 3 days later, it was announced that he died in the hospital at Willingdon, in spite of receiving every attention a horse could have. Squealer came to announce to the others he said, been pronounced during Boxer's last hours. It was the most affecting sight I've seen, said Squealer, lifting his trotter and wiping away a tear. I was at his bedside at the very last, and at the end, almost too weak to speak, he whispered in my ear that his soul sorrow had been passed on before the windmills finished. Forward, comrades, he whispered, for the name of the rebellion. Long live Animal Farm. Long live Comrade Napoleon. Napoleon is always right. Those were his very last words, comrades. Here, Squealer's demeanor suddenly changed. He fell silent for a moment, and his eyes darted suspiciously glances from side to side before he proceeded. It has come to his knowledge, he said, that a foolish and wicked rumor had been circulated at the time of Boxer's removal. None of us have noticed that a van which took Boxer away had marked horse slaughterer, and had actually jumped to the conclusion that Boxer had been sent to the knackers. It was most unbelievable, said Squealer, that any animal could be so stupid. Surely, he cried indignantly, whisking his tail and skipping from side to side, surely they knew their beloved leader, Comrade Napoleon, better than that. But the explanation was really very simple. The van was previously been the property of the knacker, and then bought by the veterinary surgeon, who had not yet painted the old name out. That is how the mistake had arisen. The animals had enormous relief to hear this, and when Squealer went on to give further graphic detail of Boxer's deathbed, the admirable care he had received, the expensive medicines of which Napoleon had paid without a thought as to the cost, their last doubts disappeared, and the sorrow they felt for their comrade's death was tempered by the thought that at least he died happy. Napoleon himself appeared in the meeting the following Sunday and pronounced a short oration in Boxer's honor. It was not even possible, he said, to bring back their eliminated comrades' remains for interment on the farm, but he ordered a large wreath to be made from laurels at the farmhouse garden to be sent to be placed on Boxer's grave. In a few days' time, the pigs intended to hold a memorial banquet in Boxer's honor. Napoleon ended his speech with a reminder of Boxer's two favorite maxims. I will work harder, and comrade, not commander, comrade. Comrade Napoleon is always right. Maxims, he said, which every animal will do adopt at his own. On the day appointed at the banquet, the grocer's van drove up from Willingdon and delivered a large wooden crate at the farmhouse. That night there was a sound of uproarious singing, and there was followed by a sound of a violent quarrel between, and at about 11 o'clock with a tremendous crash of glass. No one stirred in the farmhouse before noon the following day. The word went around from somewhere or other that the pigs have acquired the money to buy themselves another case of whiskey. Pigs. So Boxer died, but the pigs had the money to acquire another case of whiskey. So we're on the last chapter, chapter 10. Stop doing that, stupid. Sorry, my cat's stupid. Okay, years passed. The seasons came and went. The short animals fled by. A time came from there was no one who remembered the old days before the rebellion. Hello? It's you! Fool! Go! A time came when there was no one who remembered the old days before the rebellion except Clover, Benjamin, Moses the raven, and a number of the pigs. Muriel was dead. Bluebell, Jessie, and Pincher were dead. Jones, too, was dead. He had died in Everett's home in part of the country. Snowball was forgotten. Boxer was forgotten, except for the few who had known him. Clover was a stout mare now, stiffened in the joints with a tendency to rummy eyes. She was years past the retiring age, yet no animal had actually ever retired. The talk of setting aside a corner of the pasture for superannuated animals was long since been dropped. Napoleon was now a mature boar of 24 stone. Squealer was so fat he could have difficulty see out of his eyes. Only old Benjamin was the same as ever, except for a little grayer on the muzzle. And since Boxer's death, even more Morris and Tactrum than ever. There were many more creatures on the farm now, though the increase was not so great as to be expected in earlier years. Many animals had been born, to whom the rebellion was only a dim tradition, passed on by word of mouth, and others who have never heard mention of such a thing before their arrival. The farm possessed 3 horses now, beside Clover. They were fine, upstanding beasts, willing workers, and good comrades, but very stupid. None of them proved able to read, to learn the alphabet beyond the letter B. They accepted everything they were told about the rebellion and the principles of animalism, especially from Clover, for whom they had almost filleted respect. But it was doubtful whether they understood very much of it. The farm was more prosperous now, and better organized than it has ever been enlarged by 2 fields which they had brought from Mr. Pillington. The windmill was successfully completed at last, and the farm possessed threshing machines and hay elevators of its own, and a various new building was added to it. Whymper had bought himself a dog cart. The windmill, however, was not all been used for generating electrical power. It was used for milling corn and brought in a handsome money profit. The animals were hard at work, building yet another windmill. When one of them finished, it was the Dominus would be installed, but the luxuries of which Snowball had once taught the animals to dream, the stalls, the electric light, the hot and cold water, and the 3-day work week were no longer talked about. Napoleon had denounced such ideas as contrary to the spirit of animalism. The true happiness, he said, laying and working hard and living frugally. Somehow it seemed as though the farm had grown richer, without making the animals themselves any richer, except for, of course, the pigs and the dogs. Perhaps there was partly because there was so many pigs and so many dogs. It was not that these creatures did not work. After their fashion, there was, as Squealer was never tired of explaining, endless work of supervision and organization of the farm. Much of the work was of a kind that the other animals were too ignorant to understand. Sunshine, okay. Much of the work was, for example, Squealer told them, the pigs had to expend enormous labors every day upon mysterious things called files, reports, and minutes. And more menanda. There were large sheets of paper which had to be closed with writing, and as soon as they were recovered, they were burnt in the furnace. This was of highest importance for the welfare of the farm, Squealer said, but still neither pigs nor dogs would produce any food of their own labor. And they were very many of them, and their appetites were always good. And for the others, their life, so far as they knew, was as it always had been. They were generally hungry. They slept on straw. They drank from the pool. They labored in the fields. In winter they were troubled by the cold, and in summers with the flies. Sometimes the older ones among them racked their dim memories and tried to determine whether in the early years of their rebellion, when Joe's expulsion was still recent, things had been better or worse than now. They could not remember. There was nothing with which they could compare their present lives. They had nothing to go on except Squealer's list of figures, which invariably demonstrated that everything was getting better and better. The animals had found the problem insoluble. In some cases, they had little time for speculating on such things now. Only old Benjamin professed to remember every detail of his long life and to know that things never had been nor ever could be much better or much worse. Hunger, hardship, and disappointment being, so he said, the unaltered law of life. Yet, the animals never gave up hope. More, they never lost, or even an instant, their sense of humor and privilege in being members of Animal Farm. They were still the only farm in the whole country, in all of England, owned and operated by animals. Not one of them, not even the youngest, not even the newcomer who had brought from farms 10 or 20 miles, ever ceased to marvel at that. And when they heard the gun booming and saw the green flag flutter in the masthead, their hearts swelled with imperishable pride, and the talk turned towards the old heroic days, the expulsion of Jones, the writing of the 7 Commandments, the great battles in which the human invaders had been defeated. None of the old dreams had been abandoned. The Republic of the Animals, with Major foretold, the great fields of England should be untrodden by human feet, was still believed. Some day it was coming. It might not be soon. It might not be within the lifetime of any animal living now. But still it was coming. Even the tune of Beasts of England was perhaps hummed secretly here and there. And at any rate, where is that? At any rate, it was a fact that every animal on the farm knew it, though no one would dare to sing aloud. It might be that their lives were hard, and that not all their hopes had been fulfilled, but they were conscious that they were not as other animals. If they went hungry, it was from feeding tyrannical human beings. If they worked hard, at least they worked for themselves. No creature among them went upon 2 legs. No creature called another creature master. All animals were equal. One day in early summer, Squealer ordered the sheep to follow him and lead them out to a piece of waste ground on the other end of the farm, which had become overgrown with birch sapling. The sheep spent the whole day there browsing the leaves under Squealer's supervision. In the evening he returned to the farmhouse, but as the warmer weather told the sheep to stay where they were, it ended by their remaining there for a whole week. During this time, the other animals saw nothing of them. Squealer was within them for great parts of the day. He said, teaching them to sing a new song, for which the privacy was needed. It was just after the sheep had returned on a pleasant evening, when the animals had finished work and were making their way back to the farm building, that the terrified neighing of a horse sounded in the yard. Startled, the animals stopped in their tracks. It was Clover's voice. She neighed again, and all the animals broke into a gallop and rushed to the yard. Then they saw what Clover had seen. It was a pig walking on his hind legs. Yes, it was Squealer. A little awkward, as though not quite used to supporting his considerable bulk in that position, but with perfect balance he was strolling across the yard, and after a moment, out of the door of the farmhouse came a long file of pigs, all walking on their hind legs. Some did better than others, 1 or 2 even a trifle unsteady, and looked as though they had liked the support of a stick. But every one of them made his way right round the yard successfully, and finally there was a tremendous baying of dogs and a shrill crowing from the black cockerel, and out came Napoleon himself, majestically upright, casting haughty glances from side to side, and with the dogs gambolling around him. He carried a whip in his trotter. There was deadly silence. Amazed, terrified, huddling together, the animals watched. The long line of pigs marched slowly round the yard. It was as though the world had turned upside down. Then there came a moment when the first shock had worn off, and when, in spite of everything, in spite of their terror of the dogs, and of the habit developing through the long years of never complaining, never criticizing, no matter what happened, they might have uttered some word of protest. But just at that moment, as though at a signal, all the sheep burst into a tremendous bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs better, 4 legs good, 2 legs better, 4 legs good, 2 legs better. It went on for 5 minutes without stopping, but by the time the sheep had quieted down, the chance to utter any protest had passed. The pigs had marched back to the farmhouse. Benjamin felt a nose nuzzling his shoulder. He looked round to his Clover. Her old eyes looked dimmer than ever. Without saying anything, she tugged gently at his mane and led him round the end of the big barn where the 7 commandments were written. For a moment or two they stood gazing at the tarred wall and its white lettering. "My sight is failing," she said finally. "Even when I was young I could not have read what was written there, but it appeared to me that the wall looks different. Are the 7 commandments the same as they used to be, Benjamin?" For once Benjamin consented to break his rule and to read out to her what was written on the wall. There was nothing now except a single commandment. It ran, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." After that, it did not seem strange the next day the pigs were supervising the work of the farm. All carried whips in their trotters. It did not seem strange to learn that the pigs had bought themselves a wireless set, or arranged to install a telephone, and had taken out subscriptions to Joan Bull, Titbits, and the Daily Mirror. It did not seem strange that Napoleon had seen strolling in a farmhouse garden with a pipe in his mouth. No, not even when the pigs took Mrs. Jones' clothes out of the wardrobe and put them on. Napoleon himself appearing in a black coat, rat-catcher breeches, and leather leggings, while his favorite sow appeared in a watered silk dress, while Mrs. Jones had used to wear on Sundays. A later week, in the afternoon, a number of dog carts drove to the farm. A reduction of neighboring farmers had invited to make tour of inspections. They were shown all over the farm and expressed great admiration for everything they saw, especially the windmill. The animals were weeding the turnip fields. They worked diligently, hardly raising their faces from the ground, and not knowing whether to be more frightened of the pigs or of the human visitors. That evening, loud laughter burst singing across the farmhouse, and suddenly at the sound of the mingled voices, the animals were stricken with curiosity. What could be happening in there, now that for the first time animals and human beings are meeting on terms of equality? With what accord they had begun to creep as quietly as possible to the farmhouse garden. At the gate they paused, half frightened to go on, but Clover led the way in. They tiptoed to the house, and such animals were tall enough, appeared in the dining room window. There, round the long table, sat 6 farmers, and 6 more eminent pigs, Napoleon himself accompanying the seat of honor at the head of the table. The pigs appeared completely at ease in their chairs. The company had been enjoying a game of cards and had broken off for the moment, evidently in order to drink a toast. A large jug was circulating and the mugs were being refilled with beer. No one noticed the wandering faces of the animals that gazed out the window. Mr. Pilkington of Foxwood had stood up, his mug in his hand. In a moment he said he would ask the present company to drink a toast, but before doing so, there were few words he had incumbent upon him to say. It was a source of great satisfaction to him, he said, and he was sure, to the others present, to feel that a long period of mistrust and misunderstanding had now come to an end. There was a time, not that he or any other present company had shared such sentiments, but there was a time when their respected proprieties of Animal Farm had been regarded. He would now say with hostility and perhaps a certain measure of misgiving by their human neighbors. Unfortunate incidents had occurred, mistaken ideas had been current, and it felt as though the existence of a farm owned by and operated by pigs was somehow abnormal and was liable to have an upsetting effect in the neighborhood. Too many farmers had assumed without enquiry that the farm a spirit of license and indiscipline would prevail. They were nervous about the efforts upon their own animals or even upon their human employees, but all such doubts were now dispelled. Today, he and his friends had visited Animal Farm and inspected every inch with their own eyes, and what did they find? Not only the utmost sedate methods, but a discipline and an orderliness which should be an example to all farmers everywhere. He believed that he was right in saying that the lower animals of Animal Farm did more work and received less food than any animals in the country. Indeed, he and his fellow visitors today had observed many features which they intended to introduce in their own farms immediately. He would end his remarks by emphasizing, once again, the friendly feelings that subsisted and ought to subsist between Animal Farm and its neighbors. Between pigs and human beings there was not, and there need not be, any clash of interest whatsoever. Their struggles and their difficulties were one. Was not the labor problem the same everywhere? Here it be apparent that Mr. Pinkleton was about to spring some carefully prepared witticism on the company, but for a moment he took overcome by amusement, able to utter, after almost choking, during his various chins turned purple, he managed to get it out. If you have your lower animals to contend with, he said, we have our lower classes. This bonmot set on the table in uproar. Mr. Pinkleton once again congratulated the pigs on the low rations, the long working hours, and the general absence of pampering which he observed on Animal Farm. And now he finally said he would ask the company, oh, that's killing me. I'll get to you. Story's almost finished. Now he finally said he would ask the company to rise to their feet and make certain their glasses were full. Gentlemen, concluded Mr. Pinkleton, gentlemen, I give you a toast to the prosperity of Animal Farm. There was enthusiastic cheering and stamping of feet. Napoleon was so gratified that he felt that he left his place and came round the table to clink his mug against Mr. Pilkington's before emptying it. When the cheering had died down, Napoleon had remained at his feet, intimated. Sorry, it's just broken up. I have a stupid brain head. Pyroblaze started streaming Minecraft. Everyone go watch Pyroblaze. Like all Napoleon's speeches, it was short and to the point. He, too, said he was happy the period of misunderstanding was at an end. For a long time, there had been rumors circulating. He had reason to think of some malignant enemy, that there was something subversive or even revolutionary on the outlook of himself and his colleagues. And they credited with attempting to start rebellion among the animals on neighboring farms. Nothing could be further from the truth. Their sole wish now and in the past was to live at peace in normal business relations with their neighbors. The farm, which he had honor to the control, he added, with a cooperative enterprise, the title deeds, which were in his own possession, were all owned by the pigs jointly. He did not believe, he said, that any of the old suspicions still lingered, but certain changes have been made recently in the routine of the farm, which should have the effect of promoting confidence still further. Hitherto, the animals on the farm had rather a foolish custom of addressing one another as comrade. This was to suppress. They were a very strange custom, whose origins was unknown, by marching every Sunday morning past a boar's skull which was nailed to a post in the garden. This, too, was to be suppressed, and the skull was already buried. His visitors might have observed the green flag which flew from the masthead. If so, they would appear to have noted that the white hoof and horn, which had previously been marked, were now removed. been a plain green flag from now onwards. He had only one criticism, he said, to make of Mr. Pilkington's excellent and neighboring speech. Mr. Pilkington had referred throughout to Animal Farm. He could not, of course, know, for he, Napoleon, was now the first time announcing it. The name Animal Farm had been abolished. Henceforward, the farm was to be known as the Manor Farm, which he believed was the correct and original name. Gentlemen, concluded Napoleon, I give you the same toast as before, but in different form. Fill your glasses to the brim. Gentlemen, here's my toast to the prosperity of Manor Farm. There was the same hearty cheering as before, and the mugs were empty in the dregs. But as the animals outside gazed at the scene, it seemed as that some strange thing was happening. What was it all that altered in the faces of the pigs? Clover's old dim eyes flittered from one face to another. Some of them had 5 chins, some had 4, some had 3. There was seemed to be melting and changing. And the applause had come to an end. The company looked up their cards and continued the game that was interrupted, and the animals crept silently away. They had not gone 20 yards when it stopped short. An uproar of voices coming through the farmhouse. They rushed back and looked through the window again. Yes, a violent quarrel was in progress. They were shouting, banging on the table, sharp, suspicious glances, furious denials. The source of the trouble appeared to be that Napoleon and Mr. Pingleton had played an ace of spades simultaneously. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, from man to pig, and from pig to man again, and already it was impossible to say which was which. I want to thank anyone who sat through that. Choking, I heard choking when I entered the stream. Saw before. Oh, yep. Finished it. I'm just going to sit here like this for a while. To Farm Manor, my friends. Cheers. The burp sucked. There we go. Most people are here. 3. I was gonna see how long I could do that for, but I was hoping I'd be able to do it till 2 a.m. But my nose started itching. My cat. I want to see chat. What was everyone thinking? Happy reading. She died like that. What could I do about it? She's holding a farce. You can do this. Your Karen pose and the staring too. The one that doesn't have a Lunchable at the lunchtime. Fuck you. Let's see some of these translations. Some people said stuff in hello. How are you? Please hit the rate lowest so I don't lag. What are we doing, Mom? We're reading. Pig. I'm glad people got the story. Did you listen to what I said in the private chat? I like your glasses. This is new. Akaski. Oh, Akakski. Akakski. You meant Akakski. Well, hey, what's she reading? I'm laggy. I tried. It blends right in. Milk. Nice time to eat. Just follow me. I'll follow you back. What's going on? Babby boy. Thank you, Index. I'm just trying to see what people are. I finally wrote character. I wasn't holding in a fart though. I'm in a really old leather chair, so. You should drink water. You look cool. I can't hear anything. You skipped a liner? I don't remember skipping a line. I thought I saw some people speak in Tagalog earlier. Kurt Cobain. Yeah. Power. Okay, Manitop. It's Manitop. Steady. Okay, so no giveaway. Again, giveaway. I can't do a giveaway. I wasn't even. Bang Lou, read something. Burning Bang. What? Yeah, give it to me. What? This stuff makes no sense. Yo, really stupid. Oh. What the fuck is this? What are you doing? What are you doing? I like the people going, what are you doing? How many games have you played? Okay. I'm gonna go back down. Thank you for the other buff, Windex. I said when I'm trying to remember the thing that happened 7 years ago when you were silent staring. Yeah, I don't know. It's supposed to be some. I don't know. Took off the glasses. I'm gonna pretend that stream never happened.